On his 15th birthday, the blonde-haired young man was in the church and, kneeling there in front of the priest, who was already aged, and the solemn speeches that he made. Finally, the priest finished his speeches, telling the young man to go on his first journey. It was at that moment that the time came when the young man would have to work. He clasped his hands together and smiled, saying a prayer that signified the end of the ceremony. The ceremony that was held for him was a profession change ceremony. After some time, on a rocky terrain, the young man chased after a creature that jumped and hurried to hide from him. Running after him, the guy shouted at the creature to stop. Soon he was completely exhausted from the chase, but managed to drive the creature to the edge of a steep cliff. Stopping in place, the young man tried to catch his breath and said that he had finally managed to catch up with the creature. He frowned and called the creature a slime. Gripping the dagger in his hand tighter, he attacked the slime with a grin and shouted that this chase was very troublesome. When the slime was attacked, it was surprised and jumped aside to avoid being attacked. Suddenly, she jumped right over the young man's head and took a different shape, which is why he missed and hit only the air. He turned around in a daze and asked what had happened. Meanwhile, the slime wrapped around his arm, which he was holding a sword with. It rapidly spread over the guy's hand, completely engulfing it. The young man screamed in horror when he saw what the slime had done to his hand. He got nervous and asked what the slime was doing. The guy sighed and tried to calm himself down. The young man who played this blonde-haired character using virtual reality glasses clenched his teeth, grinning. He thought he could handle this world, so with trembling hands he tightly squeezed the slime that was holding him. Then he suddenly grabbed the slime with his teeth and pulled it, panting from the effort. It was at this moment that he mentally exclaimed that this was just the beginning. Soon, by his own efforts, he was able to detach the mucus from himself and free his hand. The slime, stunned by being unhooked, flew into the air, and then the young man tightened his grip on the dagger in his hands, preparing to attack it. She fell right on the edge of the young man's knife and he exclaimed that it was nice to meet him. Killed by a dagger blow, the slime fell breathlessly to the ground and began to slowly spread out. There was an unusual object sticking out of the slime. The young man breathed a sigh of relief and rubbed his hand when the slime was finished. He sat down next to the slime and suddenly noticed an object that was sticking out of his defeated enemy. Picking it up, the guy realized that it was a magic stone. After tossing the magic stone he had just obtained a couple of times, the young man noticed with interest that it was glowing. He ordered his status to be revealed. When the status was revealed, it became known that the young man's name was Jade, who was still quite a beginner. He suddenly noticed that he had one skill point. Then Jade's eyes widened in amazement. He was very overjoyed to the point that he threw his dagger into the air and began to fall right on the grass. At the same time, he shouted joyfully that it was very cool. Lying on the cool grass, he sighed with a smile. Looking straight at the snow-white clouds serenely swirling in the sky, Jade thought about this world he was in. After a while, loud swearing could be heard from the large mansion. Someone was shouting, asking what it all meant. This man continued to shout and asked if the change of profession had turned against him. This man with a beard was scolding Jade. Lowering his head, the young man muttered that he was very sorry and would improve. Suddenly, the man furiously shouted at him to get out. Jade's eyes widened in shock and asked again. The man abruptly turned to him and pointed his finger at the young man, asked why he returned as a novice. He exclaimed that it was just a real shame. That man was Jade's father. After shouting enough, he turned away from his son again and began rummaging in the drawer. Then Jade suddenly remembered something and asked his father to wait a bit. When Jade said this, his hopes immediately came to an end, because the young man's father stopped digging in the drawer and threw a small bag at his son. Jade stunned and caught him right in front of his face. Then Jade's father turned away from him and closed the drawer, while telling the young man that it was time for them to say goodbye. While he was saying this, Jade, being in a stupor, continued to hold this cloth bag in his hand. His father abruptly turned around and told Jade that he was no longer his son. Then he shouted at the young man to get out of his house. Holding the bag thrown by his father and lowering his head, Jade walked down the street. He pressed his lips tightly together and looked down at his feet, remembering that his father had so harshly disowned him. The young man poured out of the bag into his palm a small handful of coins that his father had given him before he drove them away. Jade thought about how his father had always cared about other people's opinions. But despite this, Jade would never have thought that his father would reject him so abruptly. Staying in his thoughts, the young man walked along the empty road past the signpost. Looking up mournfully, Jade thought about how money had become more important to his father than family. The young man wondered if he was destined to die right here. He asked himself if it could really end like this. As he had for some time before, he looked at the clouds peacefully floating across the sky and wondered what he should do next. Suddenly, his eye widened in shock, and Jade clutched his head. He gritted his teeth, feeling that something was wrong. Just as suddenly, he was abruptly lifted into the air and enveloped in bright light so that the young man had to cover his face with his hands. He opened his mouth in amazement, as the pain went away as suddenly as it had appeared. But as soon as the pain was gone, the world around Jade began to change a lot. Footage of a man unknown to him flashed before his eyes. At first, Jade didn't realize that this was his past, but now he knew exactly who he had once been. Previously, the young man was a man from Japan, from another world, completely different from the one in which he lived now. While living in that world, Jade was engrossed in a VR game called NSO. The young man spent a huge amount of time playing it. All the memory fragments that Jade received were related to the NSO. By training hard and developing, he managed to take the first place in the player rankings. This game was the key to living in the world he still lives in. But NSO was not the only similar game aimed at raising the player's level and elevating the player from the rank of a beginner to a stronger one. It was a game aimed at the strongest in the world. Jade wondered why a beginner couldn't be the strongest. The young man immediately answered his question, saying to himself that the reason for this is at the heart of the game. The newcomer had limitless possibilities. This meant that a beginner was an unlimited diamond in all professions. In the game that Jade had adored so much before, it was possible to acquire skills of all professions, the strongest skills. When the headache subsided, Jade took his hands away from his head, breathing heavily. He straightened up and looked around. That's when he noticed something very serious. He straightened up and opened his mouth in amazement because he realized that the world he is in now is very similar to the NSO game. Jade had not recovered from the shock yet, and cold sweat was running down his face. Suddenly, he noticed some movement and looked down. A small, furry animal was sitting next to him. Jade realized that now the level of civilization is just emerging. Remembering the rite of profession change, the young man thought that there are different professions, and their exceptions are knights and magicians. Gritting his teeth, Jade thought that if this was all true, then he just had to check it out. He tensely stretched out his hand and gave the command to open the status. His status was immediately revealed under his hand, and Jade exclaimed in surprise, and then grinned and laughed triumphantly. He joyfully raised his hands up, surprising the animal, and thought that if this was really the world of NSO, then even a beginner like him, being a fool, could become the strongest of all. Soon, Jade arrived in the city by ferry on the Sanzu River. He came all this way to find a gun store and use his little money to buy himself a new knife. By hunting small and simple monsters, Jade gained skill points, but he knew that in the future he would need much more experience to become stronger, unless of course he wanted to constantly hunt only slugs. Lying on the cool grass, the young man was smiling from ear to ear, holding the magic crystal he had obtained in his hand. He thought that he had already received 1 point, so he should strive for more. Jade stood up and stretched his stiff body, as he had already rested enough and gained strength to go hunting again. He thought that if he didn't get more skill points, he definitely wouldn't get stronger. After that, Jade's slug hunt continued. He searched every place he could see, looking for slugs. The young man found one of them stuck to a stone. The slug immediately began to run away from him, but Jade caught up with him and killed him. But slugs were not always so easy for him. They used the same technique as their predecessor, entwining their soft bodies around Jade's limbs, thereby exasperating him. 2 hours later, Jade laid out on the cloth all that he had obtained. He was surprised and delighted that he had obtained more than 10 magic stones during this time. He could have just accepted it, but Jade didn't want that. He sat down on the grass and opened his status, and then began to scroll through the list of skills. From all this list, the young man chose the search skill, for which 10 skill points were needed. Finally, Jade pressed consent to acquire this skill. The system's emotionless voice immediately sounded in his head, notifying him that the skill had been acquired. Hearing that voice again, Jade indignantly clutched his head, as he thought it was quite creepy and scary. Calming down, the young man decided that he should try out his newfound skill. Using his voice, he gave the search command. Jade closed his eyes and with the help of the skill felt that there were several living creatures not far from him. He immediately opened his eyes in joy and thought that he had finally managed to do it. Jade impatiently pointed his finger to the side and declared to himself that there was a sign of mucus in that direction. The young man chuckled, thinking that with the new skill it would be much easier for him to find a slime that was perfectly able to hide. He clenched his hand into a fist, glad that now he would not be subjected to a sudden attack by monsters. He stood up, putting his hand on the pouch that hung from his belt, and thought that at the moment he only had magic stones, so he needed to figure out what to do with them. Jade returned to the city and breathed a sigh of relief after a while finding the sign he needed. The young man approached the bearded man behind the counter and rented himself a room for the night. At night, Jade sat at a simple wooden table, illuminated only by the dim light of a lamp, and carved the spells he needed on magic crystals. Meticulously examining his work, he thought that he needed to try to make a magic weapon. There is a magic circle here on this magic stone that he was holding. Initially, only wizards could craft this kind of weapon. However, with her skills and materials, Jade can craft this weapon herself. He can also make an engraving out of stone. While sketching magic circles in a notebook, Jade thought that in his previous life he loved NSO very much, so he knows absolutely all magic circles. Jade sighed, remembering that he used to be a professional in this business. Finally, the spell on the magic stone was ready. He had 9 more to do. The young man also noticed that this item was only available at the end of the game. Carefully tracing the engraving on the stones, Jade thought that there was no such skill that could engrave the stone itself. It was hard work that could only be created by handwork. After quite a long time, Jade finished with all the stones and collapsed on the bed, stretching and yawning sleepily. He thought that starting tomorrow, his collection of materials would change dramatically. The next day, Jade went hunting again. With the magic tool made last night, Jade went into the forest. If he uses it correctly, he will soon succeed. Making his way through the trees, the young man activated the search. Despite the fatigue caused by the trees growing too thick, Jade grinned enthusiastically when the search finally found prey that was very close. The young man hid behind a tree so that he would not be noticed. The one the search found was a ferocious monster. It was a large creature that looked like a boar. Jade knew that even with good experience in battle, he was hard to beat. If you fight a monster for the first time, you can easily die from it. Jade took out a magic stone and told the monster not to hold a grudge against him for this act. Having said that, Jade immediately hid behind a tree as this boar seemed to sense something. The monster began to wander around the clearing and grunt with displeasure. Suddenly he became alert and growled angrily. Standing behind a tree, Jade shuddered, clenching his teeth tightly, and cold sweat trickled down his face. He wondered if the boar had noticed him. Without waiting for the boar to attack him, Jade exclaimed to the stone to change. The one in his hand suddenly disappeared, and then just as suddenly appeared, but it was already another stone, much larger than the past. Jade squeezed it in his hand and thought it was just fine. As soon as the magic stone appeared in the young man's hand, the boar shuddered and screamed, and then just collapsed breathlessly to the ground. As he took the dagger out of its scabbard, Jade thought about how he had acquired this skill yesterday. Its effect is to replace one magic stone with another stone that was in the monster. Now the young man could easily obtain the magic crystal of an enemy who was much stronger than him, and the change will help him in this. With such thoughts, he slowly approached the large body of his fallen prey. Jade squatted over the boar and, closing his eyes, stretched out his hand to it. He immediately felt that the monster's magic barrier had disappeared without a trace thanks to the skill. Now, this skill was the youth's greatest advantage. This magical barrier, which disappeared when Jade extracted the stone from the boar's body, was intended to improve the characteristics of monsters. Pursing his lips tightly, Jade raised the dagger over the dead boar's body. When the young man finished with this, he breathed a sigh of relief and wiped his forehead. He thought about how every monster has its own stone. This is their source of strength, supporting the body. The slime that Jade used to hunt also had magic stones inside, but boars have these stones that differ in size and strength from those of slime. Jade raised his hand and gave the command to open the card. With the newly obtained boar crystal, Jade will feel much more confident than before. And if this is the case, then he will be able to replace the boar crystal with a slime crystal every time, which does not suit the boar at all. In this way, the young man will be able to make the boar numb. The amount of mana of the boar will decrease, so its protective barrier will disappear altogether. Seeing that he had accumulated 100 skill points, Jade was very happy with his first 100. The essence of the replacement skill was to weaken someone else's magic stone. The young man stood up, still continuing to rejoice at his small achievement. But the substitution skill also had a restriction on exchange. It consisted in the fact that the skill does not work with some monsters, for example, dragons. Jade, smiling, hurried in the opposite direction from the boar. He knelt down by the stream, in which cold water was slowly flowing. The young man scooped it up with his hands and washed his face. He thought about the fact that the skill only works for medium-level monsters, then it was completely useless. After washing, Jade got up and began to wipe his damp face with his hand. Just at that moment he looked around and noticed something to the side. The young man quickly hid behind a tree, keeping his hand on the hilt of his sword. Looking out from behind a tree, he noticed a huge beehive hanging from a tree branch. Buzzing insects crawled through this hive. Looking closer, Jade noticed that these insects were wasps. That's when he realized that he had stumbled upon a nest of large wasps. The young man activated a search that showed him what was inside this nest. Clenching his fist, Jade calculated that 2 large wasps were currently on the surface, and 6 more were inside the nest. There were also 9 more wasps outside the hive. Jade suggested that it seems that most wasps are now in search of food. Tightening his grip on the dagger in his hand, Jade thought that usually beginners avoid these wasps since there are no masters with them ready to help them with this right away. And alone, the newcomers simply could not cope with this. Looking at his palm, which contained several magic stones, Jade confidently thought that he had a chance of winning this battle. Jade raised his crystal hand and activated the change skill. The magic stones immediately rose into the air and shone very brightly. After that, they disappeared, and the wasps, who were peacefully crawling and flying, shuddered. At the same moment, stones extracted from wasps appeared in place of the magical slug stones above Jade's head. The immobilized wasps began to fall to the ground, having lost their powers, and Jade squeezed their magic stones in his hand. The young man squatted down next to one of the axes and stretched out his hand with a dagger. Jade said it was dangerous for him to act alone, but he just had to survive. Having said that, he immediately stabbed the wasp with a dagger. Soon, Jade was sitting on a fallen tree, his legs stretched out in front of him in a relaxed manner. In total, he gained 500 experience for killing wasps, so this time he could take a better skill. For this skill, 100 points were needed, and the young man took it. A voice immediately sounded in his head, informing him that Jade had received the vault. Having decided to try out a new skill, Jade raised his finger and activated the vault. It immediately opened at his command. Acquiring this skill meant that Jade would now be able to carry several things at once, and even quite large ones. After that, the young man got up from the log. Jade went to the already empty wasp den and, raising his hand, began to put it in the vault. He was interested in the idea that he could now store objects in a distorted space. And then, he could take them out at any convenient moment. When the hive was cleaned up, Jade exclaimed and said that this was a very good travel skill, thanks to which he would be able to train sweets and sell the hive profitably. Jade was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. He sighed and turned in that direction. The young man returned to the body of the boar he had killed earlier, then sat down on the ground and began to draw on it with a stick, wondering why he had not taken this very useful skill earlier. After drawing a table with numbers, Jade thought about the fact that this skill actually has its limitations. That is why he will be able to pick up the boar only after he strengthens the vault. Jade stood up, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He thought that he could strengthen the storage a little, then he would have enough space for a boar. The young man decided to triple the storage, and the system informed him that it was successful. After that, Jade decided to check the vault again and raised his hand, and then activated it. The vault immediately appeared above his head, and Jade exclaimed admiringly because it had become much bigger. Then Jade put his hands together, and then abruptly, with a smile, put his hand in front of him and opened the vault next to the boar, saying that now he could take the pig with him. Soon, Jade came to another place. He came to a place where several large buildings stood next to each other. It was an adventurer's guild. Jade walked over to the door, which had notices posted on it that said how to get in to the person he needed. After reading this, Jade curiously wondered if he would be able to sell his stuff in this place. Clicking on the ad, he found himself in a place where a lot of people were gathered who were selling their loot. Jade called out to the girl behind the counter and opened the vault, and then stretched out his hands there. The young man began to try to get the boar out of there, grabbing its horns. He exclaimed that he wanted to sell something here. A stunned girl ran up. This was the girl Jade had called out to. She adjusted her glasses, which had strayed from her haste, and, holding a book in her hands, she anxiously asked the young man what he was doing. Jade released the boar and hesitated nervously. Awkwardly scratching his head, he finally answered the girl and muttered that he was just trying to earn a little extra money and this boar was his luggage. Jade suddenly squinted and wondered if storage was a universal skill for a beginner. The young man remembered that usually beginners carried bags with them, inside of which there was a bottomless pocket, so there was no problem with this. The girl approached Jade and stared at him suspiciously. He couldn't think of anything better to justify his storage, so he pretended to shrug his shoulders carelessly and said that it was just magic for storing items. The girl asked in surprise, Putting her hand on the top of her glasses, she suddenly became even more suspicious and hovered over Jade, saying that she had never heard of such magic. Jade decided to pretend that everything was fine, then the girl sighed and decided to leave the subject. She smiled and held out her hand, telling Jade to show her his adventurer ID. Jade didn't say anything, and the girl looked at him expectantly. The young man did not think that it would come to this, so he said that he did not have an ID. The girl immediately shouted at him menacingly, asking how such a thing could even be. She exclaimed that you can only go on adventures with an adventurer's certificate. Jay replied to her that he had started it only recently. When the girl moved away from him and sat down next to the defeated boar, he scratched his head again and said that even if he registered, he could fail the entrance exam. The girl turned to him and said that Jade was strange. Arching an eyebrow questioningly, she asked how he was able to kill the boar, but at the same time, be afraid to fail the entrance exams. Jade didn't think that the girl would have such a reaction, but he can't just tell her about it because the change, skill. You don't use it that easily. It was for this reason that Jade left her question unanswered. Finally, the girl got to her feet and sighed, saying that she would buy a jade boar, but then the young man would have to register. Hearing her words, Jade passed his hand over his forehead and breathed a sigh of relief. Closing his eyes, he thought that in some ways it would be easier to pass the exam, but at the moment, Jade did not have the self-defense or attack skills to successfully pass the exam. Suddenly, the young man abruptly opened his eyes, as he realized that he had something else that could be his trump card. He exclaimed that he would pass the exam. Then the girl enthusiastically jumped up to him and grabbed his hands. She exclaimed that if Jade passed the exam, it would make everything much easier. After catching her breath, she put her hand in her chest with a smile and said that she had forgotten to say something. The girl said that she was the one who accepted people into this adventurer guild, and her name was Sylvia. Jade shook her hand and also introduced himself, saying that he was very glad to meet her. When this was over, Sylvia invited the young man to follow her so that she could show him the main hall. Soon, reading Jade's statement, Sylvia narrowed her eyes dejectedly and addressed the young man by name. She doubtfully said that it was all about Jade's statement and asked if he was really a beginner. Jade immediately replied to the girl that it was so. Sylvia trembled and mentally noticed that Jade didn't even hesitate with the answer. Then she straightened up and almost solemnly declared that in this case the young man had no chance to pass the exam. Jade was not upset at all. He told the girl that this was not all and asked if there were other ways to pass the exam. Sylvia hesitated awkwardly and mumbled that there were such ways. She smiled at the young man and, turning away from him, declared that for the sake of him who killed the boar, she would make allowances for him. Folding his hands on the table, Jade doubtfully thought that he doubted it very much. As she was leaving, Sylvia turned to the young man, telling him to wait a second because she needed to call the examiner. Soon, someone approached Jade from behind and, looking back, the young man yelled. He was a huge man who was 5 times the size of Jade. He put his hand on the young man's shoulder and asked if he was the person who wanted to register as an adventurer. Looking up at him, Jade froze in horror, unable to utter a word. When Jade turned to the man, he folded his arms and introduced himself as Ramon. He said that if he noticed that Jade was not doing well on the exam, then Ramon would destroy this monster himself. Grinning, he told Jade that, for this reason, he should evaluate his strength in advance and give up the idea of being an adventurer. Jade listened to his words in surprise, looking up at the man, and said that he would not change his mind. The young man smiled and said that he would definitely pass this exam and not fail it. He was confident in his abilities. Still smiling, Ramon accepted Jade's words and said that the young man chooses the target himself anyway. He asked if Jade would dare to go for the big monsters. Without waiting for an answer, Ramon told Jade to listen to him. They came to the western forest to take the exam. Looking around, Jade frowned and chuckled. Ramon, who was also making his way through the trees and looking around, heard the sound and turned to Jade. He called out to the young man. Ramon said that Jade was somehow moving forward too confidently, just as if she already knew where the monster they needed for the test was. Leaning on a tree, the young man replied that he really knows where the monster is. Ramon asked if this meant that Jade had the magic to show up, and then he mockingly asked another question, asking if the young man was a bloodhound. Not paying any attention to the questions of the attendant, Jade looked to the side and thought that the monster was somewhere in this place, and this monster was quite strong. The young man stopped abruptly and pointed his finger towards the bushes, saying that the monster was there. Having received no answers to the questions, Ramon just sighed with a smile and shrugged his shoulders. But when he saw where Jade was pointing and what was there, Ramon's face twisted in horror. He called out to the young man in fear and told him, so that he could come back right away. Jade looked at him blankly and asked why he had to come back. Then Ramon asked him if the young man knew what kind of monster was sitting there. Jade certainly knew that. He said that it was earth-shaking and asked the attendant if he was mistaken. The earth-shaker was a huge white monkey that ate monsters smaller than himself. The young man thought that the monster was called that because the ground was shaking under his feet and he had great strength. Therefore, the name corresponds to the monster. But because of the colossal strength of this monster, he got a nickname: Exterminating Armies. But in this case, Jade had a change technique. He grinned and tossed a magic stone into the air. After catching him, Jade confidently thought that this was why Earthshaker was a pretty easy opponent for him. Ramon screamed indignantly and asked how Jade could keep going to this monster while knowing who he was, because he would just kill them. At his scream, Jade clutched his head and covered his ears. Jade turned towards the monster and thought that it was too late to run, because the Earthshaker had noticed them a long time ago. Ramon turned away in horror and covered his head with his hands, and Jade continued to look at the monster and thought that soon Ramon would realize that the young man could kill this monster and calm down. Covering his head with his hands, Ramon nervously muttered that this was the end of them, because he would not be able to kill such a strong monster alone. Jade, holding a magic stone in his hands, turned to Ramon and told him to listen to him. Lifting the glowing stone higher, the young man said that his fighting methods were very strange. He then asked if he could use only one magic tool to fight the monster. Ramon exclaimed that the young man could do whatever he wanted because in any case it would not help them from being killed by the Earthshaker. After receiving permission, Jade stopped holding the stone and it slowly rose into the air. Then the young man activated the change skill, and the stone glowed even brighter, sending glowing rays in different directions. The monster turned menacingly when he heard sounds behind him. It was at this moment that Jade's skill was fully used, so the slug magic stone in his hand was replaced by the earth-shaking skill. After losing his stone, the monster roared loudly. And then he fell to the ground with a crash, being stunned. Ramon, who saw this, was stunned. He wondered how this could happen because it was an earth-shaking, very powerful monster. He abruptly jumped to his feet and, pointing at Jade with his finger, asked what he had done to defeat the monster. The young man looked at the man uncomprehendingly and replied that he had just used his skill. Ramon asked again. Then Jade explained to him that he had simply swapped the crystals, and now there was a replacement stone in the body of the Earthshaker. Due to the fact that the new stone was too weak for him, the monster's energy weakened and he blacked out. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, Ramon sighed, saying that the monster was defeated by such nonsense. Holding the stone in his hands, Jade chose to remain silent. He turned towards the unconscious monster and thought that as a result, they have what they have. The young man sat down on a stone. Jade opened the vault and put the magic stone there. He thought that if the monster got a weak crystal, despite its strength, it would still die from shock. If you leave the monster alone, it won't die. Jade just had to strike. The young man thought that when it comes to Earthshakers, they have hard skin and eyeballs. Those who are just starting their journey cannot strike even at their weak points, and the only thing that can be done is to move forward. Ramon looked in surprise at the young man who was sitting on a rock, and then flew up to him and exclaimed that now they can defeat the monster. Ramon shouted at the young man to leave everything else to him. Taking out his sword from behind his back, Ramon was about to finish off the Earthbreaker. Jade started up in a daze and changed his face, telling Ramon to wait because his exam is still in progress. After all, he can't just hand it over if he gets help. Hearing his words, Ramon was surprised and drooped, muttered that Jade was right, and then apologized to him. Jade breathed a sigh of relief and said that he just had to wait, and then the monster would die on its own. The young man thought with displeasure that despite all this, he still needed skills. He looked down and opened the control panel. It showed that at the moment, Jade had 400 skill points. Soon, the young man got up from the stone and turned to look at the Earthshaker, who was lying motionless on the ground. Jade decided that he was already dead. Thanks to the death of the monster, he received those 400 skill points, so the young man decided to improve the storage. The system notified him that the storage had been improved by +4. Jade smiled and thought about his next step. He used the vault to put the dead Earthshaker in there. Thanks to the improvement of the storage, he successfully got there. Ramon was surprised that the monster's body had disappeared and asked Jade about where it had disappeared to. Closing the vault, the young man turned around with a smile and replied that it was thanks to his magic. Upon hearing his explanation, the man was greatly stunned and asked about it again. Jade smugly replied to him that it was indeed his magic. Excitedly scratching his cheek, Jade turned to Ramon and asked if he had passed the exam to join the guild. Ramon was surprised by his change of mood and replied that he had successfully passed the exam, then he chuckled. The man told Jade that he definitely had an idea about battles, that's why he has a bright future in the guild. When they returned from the forest after the exam, Sylvia was waiting for them on the way to the Adventurers Guild, waving her hand at them with a smile. On his way to meet her, Jade waved back at her. When Jade and Ramon reached Sylvia, she greeted them joyfully and asked how the young man's exam went. Ramon Tutu began to exclaim admiringly that Jade had done something amazing. He asked Sylvia if they could raise the young man's rank to B rank right away. The girl asked, stunned. Adjusting her glasses, she asked Ramon if he was joking about it. When the man waved his head negatively, she immediately turned around and rushed to the guild, saying that she would only take a minute to call the guildmaster. Jade helplessly thought that he just wanted to register to sell his loot, and here they were trying to promote him somewhere. Soon, the guildmaster, who was no longer young, came. He asked in surprise what had happened, and also if Ramon wanted to say that the novice Jade was not far behind in strength from the B rank. Sylvia, out of breath from running, stood behind the master. Putting his hand on the head of Jade, who was unhappy with this, Ramon began to talk in colors and with special enthusiasm about what happened on the exam. After listening to his story, the master thoughtfully scratched his beard and doubtfully said that he did not even know whether to believe Ramon. The man immediately replied to him that Jade has a special magic with the vault, and he can prove it. After Ramon's statement, the guildmaster turned to Sylvia and asked her what she thought about it. The girl with a smile seemed to him that she had definitely seen this magic of Jade's vault. After thinking about it, the guildmaster turned to Ramon and said that if his words were true, then Jade could show him her storage magic. To do this, they approached the building of the Adventurers Guild and went under the roof. There, Jade raised his hand up and demonstrated to the guildmaster how he was opening the vault. After opening the vault, Jade turned to the observers and informed them that they had better move away a little. When they obeyed him and moved away, the young man raised his other hand and completely opened the vault, after which he took out the earthshaker. The dead body of a huge monster fell out of the vault and fell to the floor with a crash, breaking it. Upon seeing this, Sylvia and the master opened their mouths in a daze, and Ramon proudly crossed his arms over his chest. Jade was surprised that the monster had broken the floor. His eyes widened in surprise. The bearded guildmaster exclaimed that it was indeed the body of that monster. Reaching into the vault, Jade said he had something else. He asked if Ramon had told them about it. Taking out the earth-shaking magic crystal, the young man informed that he could swap monster crystals. The master fell into a stupor, realizing what was going on, and Sylvia recovered from the shock and said that this was just a great thing, and that now the mystery of Jade's victory over a strong monster had been solved. Sylvia thought of the boar monster that Jade had brought to sell before he was sent to take the exam. The girl said that when they gutted this monster, they did not find the magic stone. She took out a piece of cloth in which something was wrapped and said that it was only a piece of stone where there should have been a whole one. Sylvia opened the cloth and showed its contents to Jade. There were fragments of the slug's magic stone. The girl told him that when they found it, they were very surprised. The guildmaster said that the method of replacing the stone, it turns out, is the main weapon of the young man. Jade confirmed his words. Finally, the master smiled and said that if Jade could prove it, then there would be no problem. He said that they would have special conditions for this exam. Hearing his words, Jade smiled happily, and Ramon, standing behind him, triumphantly clenched his hand into a fist. Soon there was a certificate on the tray in front of Jade. Sylvia said that it was proof that the young man was an adventurer. When Jade picked up the ID and looked at it curiously, Sylvia told him that initially, as Ramon had said, he wanted to assign and register the young man as a B rank. Sighing, the girl said that since then, Jade's strength and combat capability could double, or even triple. But in fact, everything turned out to be completely different, and Jade was registered as an E rank, among the ranks from G to S. Sylvia smiled and adjusted her glasses on the bridge of her nose, telling Jade that he was now the conqueror of 3 stars. The young man asked if this meant that he was now a 3-star crusader. The girl exclaimed joyfully that this was so, because there was a system by which he could send a request for a rank above the number of his stars. In his case, it turned out that way, so he can safely and rightfully claim the B rank. Jade happily said that it was just incredible, and with a smile thanked Sylvia for what she had done for him. The girl agreed with his delight, and then the friend turned around, remembering something. She turned to Jade, already holding a tray full of money in her hands. She explained that this was the price for the material that the young man had brought today. There were exactly 40,000 gold pieces on this tray. While Jade was reaching for the money in anticipation, Sylvia told him that the giant hornet's nest was worth 30,000 gold, and the boar was worth 13,000, of which 3,000 were withdrawn for the exam. Therefore, the total amount of payment is 40,000. Jade opened the vault and put the money he earned there. The young man thought that now he could not worry about money for a while. He thanked Sylvia from the bottom of his heart for that. The girl awkwardly waved her hands when she saw Jade bowing and thanking her, and told Tom not to do that. She told the young man to come to them again. She would be glad to meet him again. Jade left the guild when it was already evening outside. Hurriedly returning to the hotel, he easily killed several slugs that were unlucky enough to meet him. Back in his room, Jade spent the rest of the night carving engravings on magic stones, yawning wearily. The next day, having gained strength, Jade went hunting again. During this time, he developed a completely new strategy in order to collect mana more efficiently. As a preliminary preparation, he tested 20 different tactics. He then used up another 50 skill points to improve the search 3 times. Thinking about it, Jade activated the search skill. Thanks to the improvements, the range of search usage has become much larger. Soon, Jade looked away with satisfaction, finding the one he needed. The young man slowly moved towards his prey. Thanks to the search, he knew that there were 2 wild boars and 15 giant wasps, 6 mole monsters, and 1 underground worm in the forest. Jade opened the vault and reached into it, looking for the item he needed. He took out the boar's magic stone, which he had obtained yesterday. The young man used the skill of change, and the stone, glowing, rose into the air. When Jade activated the skill, those monsters he found in the area looked in surprise at where the young man was. Bright luminous rays began to break through the ground and fly towards Jade. The boar's magic stone absorbed all of them. Then a bright and large pillar of light burst out of the magic stone, which caused dust to rise into the air. Over time, the stone began to gradually collapse and decrease in size. A huge black funnel formed in the sky above Jade's head, and something was descending from it down to the young man. Those creatures surrounded Jade and formed their wolf-like shapes. The young man looked at the wolves that surrounded him. These monsters had 4 eyes each, and they were grinning viciously at Jade. He said that now he understood everything. Jade frowned. He knew that these creatures were called phantoms. These are wolf demons formed from a magical substance. These monsters absorb any magical energy and resist magical attacks, being almost invulnerable. Since wolf demons do not have a physical shell, and they are a substance, the exchange of magic stones can kill all living things around. Jade regretted that he hadn't noticed it earlier. He took the magic stones in his hand. The young man threw them into the air and activated the magic power. The magic stones lit up and began to draw in the wolves. After a couple of seconds, several round stones fell at Jade's feet. The young man took one stone in his hands and thought that it was a phantom core, which is a magic stone capable of replenishing a person's magical power. Jade opened his vault and began to dump all the phantom cores there, which made bursts as they fell into the vault. He was thinking that such stones were sold for a lot of money on the black markets. The young man suddenly became a little indignant and asked himself the question of why he had not done anything until that moment. In general, Jade intentionally caused a magical catastrophe with the help of phantoms. Jade finally dropped the last phantom core into the vault with a big splash. He thought that the magic tools would not be active until the correct spell was applied to them, but if everything goes smoothly, they will work without interruption. However, no effect occurred, as the process was prevented by a phenomenon called a magical catastrophe. It is the magical catastrophe that absorbs energy, destroying weak monsters and then creating new ones, completely different, endowed with strong magical energy. A phantom can be killed instantly with an SP above 300, and the bonus was a rare magic stone, which is called a phantom core. Jade revealed his status and thought that this way he would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He was suddenly surprised to find that he had new skills, and there were even 2 of them. Rapid regeneration, improved physical abilities, and restored the body. Martial arts helped to use hand-to-hand combat techniques in combat. Jade boosted them by +4, but it still wasn't enough to increase the points. Along the way, Jade caught a reed monster and obtained 7 more phantoms with the help of a magic circle. He increased regeneration to +7 and martial arts to +6. The young man warmed up and decided that it was time to test his strength. He looked around for something to practice on. Jade found a large stone that was perfect for this, and then lightly kicked it with his foot. From such a seemingly weak blow, A huge stone flew into the air and fell a few dozen meters away from Jade. He looked dumbfounded at the result of his improvements and thought that this was indeed an inhuman force. He put his hand in his pocket and sighed inwardly because he wanted to find a worthy opponent to fight him and show his might. Jade looked around and found the one he needed. There was a monster that looked like a monkey sitting on a tree right next to the young man and eating something. Jade realized that it was a shadow monster. Then he thought that this was just fine because this is exactly who he needs right now. A shadow monster of the same rank. Like the one who shakes the earth, but still inferior to him in his physical strength. His attacks are strong enough, so it won't be easy for Jade to defeat him. Noticing the young man, the monster became alert and jumped down from the tree. Standing directly in front of the monster, Jade wondered if he could defeat this monster without using magical powers. The young man thought that this was a great idea, which he would now check out. The shadow monster snarled at him viciously. After that, the monster very quickly rushed at Jade. Intending to attack, he stretched out his paw. The young man frowned and managed to jump aside, thereby dodging the attack, and the monster just hit the air. Jade was surprised to notice that the shadow monster was really strong. Immediately after that, the young man kicked him in the neck. After striking, Jade jumped aside, and the monster fell to the ground with a crash. He shook his head and then turned to the young man and growled angrily. Jade sighed awkwardly, thinking that the shadow monster was very angry at his action. But Jade could easily calculate all his actions, since, in the opinion of the young man, they are banal to the point of being formulaic. Jade clenched his hand into a fist as the monster ran straight at him in order to avenge the blow that the young man had so suddenly inflicted on him. The shadow monster was already close enough to the young man and raised his paw to strike, then Jade jumped aside in time and the monster missed, so Jade had an extra 0.5 seconds. While the monster was stunned that he had missed, Jade raised his hand to strike. After that, the young man kicked the shadow monster with such force that it flew several dozen meters away and crashed into the ground. The young man watched his flight. On trembling paws, the infuriated monster rose from the ground. There was blood all over his face. Then he tilted his head forward, and Jade wondered if that meant the monster had decided to use a different tactic. Thrusting his head forward, the shadow monster rushed at the young man. Seeing this, Jade found it an interesting tactic and prepared to fight the monster. He glanced to the side and thought that there was one thing in the monster's tactics, but it was that the shadow monster was still easy to read. At that moment, Jade jumped into the air right above the monster that was rushing at him. Grabbing the man's paws so that he couldn't move them, Jade jumped on top of him. Pressing his knee on the monster's head, Jade thought that the second mistake of the monster is that it goes ahead. When attacking, he constantly raises his head up, thereby not looking around, and Jade, calculating all his movements, moves aside and the monster misses. Meanwhile, the monster was already flying towards the mountain. The monster's head kick was aimed straight at the mountain, and because Jade was holding its paws, it couldn't dodge in any way. Then the young man jumped off the back of the monster so as not to hit his head either. The shadow monster's body crashed right into a small mountain and completely broke it. Landing on his feet, Jade looked thoughtfully at the monster, which lay motionless in the rubble. The young man opened the control panel. Initially, it showed that he had only 150 skill points, but after defeating the monster, it became 230. After that, Jade opened the vault and put the shadow monster's body there to sell. He smiled, thinking that he had easily defeated the monster without using the change skill that he had used when fighting the Earthshaker. Jade jumped up joyfully on the spot, realizing that he was getting stronger. When it was already evening, the young man was strolling carelessly along the road, whistling to himself. Suddenly, he noticed something and stopped whistling. He was surprised to find a group of armed men heading towards the forest. Cautiously peering out from behind a tree, Jade wondered who these people were. And then he saw that the biggest man of the group was carrying the girl's body on his shoulder. They were talking to each other. The man with the eye patch said that he thinks they will quickly buy this product. The big man replied with a smile that they would sell the goods for a huge sum. Upon hearing them, Jade frowned. The young man sighed, thinking that he couldn't just leave. He shouldn't have interfered in their affairs, but the young man decided to do it anyway. Getting to his feet, he thought that it was possible that this was his chance to help a person and get a new level. Since he had used earth magic in the battle with monsters, now he had a chance to knock out another skill. Jade grimly raised the skill and called the skill code 2014. The young man had just acquired the killing skill. Having prepared for the battle, Jade rushed in pursuit of those men. When he saw the three people in front of him, he realized that he had caught up with them. The young man hid behind a tree so that he would not be noticed. Suddenly, he looked down at the ground, and when he saw some rocks there, an idea came to his mind. Jade picked up a stone and threw it into a tree, next to which a robber in a hood was passing. When he heard the sound of a stone hitting a tree, he turned around in surprise. Then he grabbed for the weapon that was hanging from his belt. Then Jade launched his attack. Hearing the sound of someone approaching from his side, the robber only managed to turn around in surprise. But it was too late, because Jade kicked him right in the chest. When the strong blow reached the target, blood rose to the robber's throat, and he coughed hoarsely. Jade, after striking, froze for a while, watching as the robber fell backwards to the ground. Then Jade used the abbreviation and hurried to escape, because the bandit's companions turned around when they heard the noise. Hiding behind a tree again, the young man watched as the excited robbers ran to their colleague lying on the ground. He opened the status and saw that his SP had increased. Jade was now confident in his theory. Meanwhile, the robber in the blindfold asked what had happened. His partner put the girl on the ground and said that someone was trying to stop them. Jade was confident that he could get extra skill points if he won. Especially points will be added if you defeat bandits or especially dangerous criminals, so he needs to use a special technique to stun them and then paralyze the enemy. This way he will be able to destroy the bandits. But the thing is, even if he kills them all, his SPAW level won't increase. The bandit in the blindfold told his colleague that they needed to stay close to each other and not lose their vigilance. As he took out his dagger, Jade thought that if he disarmed the robbers he would get 10 skill points. He immediately realized that they were robbers, but the young man needed to make sure, so he simply disarmed one of them. As he came out from behind the tree, Jade thought that now that everything was confirmed, he would not let the robbers go so easily. The robber in the blindfold turned to Jade, who was coming out from behind a tree with a dagger in his hands. He mockingly asked who the boy was. Jade answered him threateningly that even though he has the body of a child, his mind and soul belong to an adult. He's unemployed, but that's not the main thing. The big robber pointed his finger at him and exclaimed, asking how this young man could be a beginner. The man in the blindfold turned to his colleague and replied that it was just a bluff. Then he talked about what would happen if it was true. He abruptly rushed at Jade and exclaimed that if Jade was telling the truth, then he would just chop the young man to pieces. Jade also rushed into battle and threw his blade at the robber. He deflected his sword blow and grinned and exclaimed, calling Jade a fool, if he thinks he can beat him. But suddenly the robber's eye widened in shock. Frowning, Jade opened the vault and took out a magic crystal. When he heard the robber's words, he thought that this would not happen, and then abruptly threw a stone at the robber, aiming at his head. The stone hit right in the head, killing the robber in front of his colleague, just as Jade wanted. The last remaining robber flew into a rage and rushed at Jade. The bully pounced on the young man and swung his huge fist at him. Jade timed his blow and managed to dodge. The bully missed and punched straight into the ground. At the same moment, Jade struck at the opponent. The blow landed squarely on the goon's jaw. It was so strong that the man flew several meters back and slammed his back into a tree standing behind with all his might. Jade threatened Tom with his fist and thought that he was strong, so he was not to be trifled with. He turned towards the girl lying on the ground and noticed that she still hadn't regained consciousness. She was still tied up, so the young man decided that he needed to get rid of these ropes. That's what he did. Squatting down next to the girl, he thought that he needed to bring her to her senses, but due to the lack of skill points, it would be problematic to do this, so he urgently needed to come up with something. The young man thought that something was wrong. Raising his head to the sky, Jade was stunned to find 2 large birds hovering over the forest. Looking closer, he realized that these were mighty eagles. The young man deliberately stood up so that those birds noticed him and approached him. As they began to descend, Jade took out 2 magical slugstones from the vault and held them between his fingers. Then he used the substitution skill, and the eagles screamed in shock when their magic stones were replaced with someone else's. Having lost the ability to move, they fell down like a stone and hit the ground, causing their feathers to fly in different directions. Looking at their magic stones in his hands, Jade thought that they had attacked at the most opportune moment for him. Having finished them off with a sword, the young man thanked the eagles for their help. Then he opened the control panel and gained additional strength. After receiving it, Jade directed his hand towards the unconscious girl and used magic power. Then she slowly opened her eyes. Seeing that the girl had finally woken up, Jade was delighted. Sleepily rubbing her eyes with her hand, she asked, puzzled, where she was. But suddenly she saw the unconscious robber and screamed in fright. At the same time, she grabbed Jade, and when she realized this, she was very confused. She immediately jumped away from the young man and apologized for her behavior. Jade told her not to worry because the robber is unconscious, so he won't touch her. Calming down a little, the girl muttered that she did not remember how she ended up here. She asked Jade if he had helped her and saved her. The young man asked her if she remembered what happened before she was kidnapped. He asked if anyone had helped the robbers kidnap her. The girl turned to him in embarrassment and replied that she had not been kidnapped, but had simply been very badly deceived. She said with a smile that she is an artist, but her work has never been very popular. They were not for sale, so the girl tried to somehow survive by putting everything on the market. One day, a masked robber called her over and told her that he had a job and she just needed to follow him. The girl immediately suspected something was wrong and, entering the alley, the robber said that he would sell her, and she did not remember what happened after that. After listening to her story, Jade smiled and said that being an artist is quite interesting. He asked the girl what exactly she was doing. The girl began rummaging in her bag, saying that she always carries tools with her. She took a hammer and other accessories out of her bag and exclaimed that she was a sculptor and could create good sculptures. When Jade heard about this, he was a little surprised. He asked the girl if she wanted to work with him despite the fact that she had been stolen. The girl was shocked by Jade's suggestion. She asked what he meant. The young man awkwardly scratched his head and apologized to the artist. He explained his offer by saying that he was overexcited, so he didn't really explain anything. Then Jade told the girl that he was an aspiring adventurer. He said that in order to increase his level, he needs to collect various items. After listening to his story, the girl was delighted. After all, she learned that she can create magical tools at the expense of her sculptures. The girl found it amazing. Then she abruptly turned away and muttered that it was exciting. Jade said with a smile that everything was fine, and he understood her reaction. The young man tells Lei that he will master magic skills by drawing circles in the sky. The girl was even more surprised and said that it was a great ability. She hung her head dejectedly and thanked Jade for his support, and then said she didn't know if she could do something like that now. She said that she was referring to magic tools. As for this, you need to create a sculpture. Folding her hands in her lap, the girl said that she was not such a professional, so the tools might be of poor quality. Jade mentally contradicted her doubts and said out loud that this was why he wanted to ask the girl for help. The young man told the girl that the magic tools he needed could be created manually. The girl was surprised and asked again. Then Jade decided to explain everything to her. He said that when a wizard creates magic tools by hand, they develop more magical skills, since they are made with the help of hands and valuable materials. Therefore, sculpture will be most effective in this regard. The girl looked down thoughtfully, processing the information she received, and then said that she thought she could try to help Jade. The young man immediately started up joyfully and asked if it was true that she could help him. The girl replied to him that it would be her gratitude that Jade had saved her. Clenching her hands into fists, she abruptly and confidently exclaimed that she would help her savior, and then she asked Jade to let her help him. Jade was delighted and agreed. Holding out his hand to the girl, he invited them to meet and said that his name was Jade. The girl smiled and held out her hand in return and introduced herself as Gina. They shook hands. Remembering something, Jade opened the vault, saying that it needed to be fixed. The young man decided to check how many % his level rises after catching these robbers. After these words, Jade began to put them away in the vault. The girl immediately realized that this was the magic of the vault, which he had mentioned earlier. She asked if such magic was really possible. Scratching his head, Jade apologized to Gina for taking too long. After putting the robber with the blindfold and the bully in the vault, Jade looked at the latter thoughtfully and found something strange about it. He turned to Gina, saying that he needed help. Jade asked her if she could carve certain symbols on a magic item. The girl replied that she could try. Then Jade began to explain to her how to do it. After drawing a symbol on the paper, he told Gina that it was a sample. He asked if the girl could carve this symbol on a magic stone. The young man warned her that the main thing in this case is to observe the proportions and location. After listening to him, Gina suddenly took out a whole set of tools from her bag and exclaimed that she would do everything. Jade let out a surprised sigh when he saw the number of tools Gina had. The girl put a table on the ground and fixed a magic stone on it. Jade looked at it curiously. When Gina began to carve on the stone, the young man sat down contentedly nearby. Soon Gina turned around and exclaimed with a smile that everything was ready. Jade was stunned because only 3 minutes had passed and all the work was already ready. He picked up a magic stone with carvings and thought with admiration that it was just perfect. Jade thought that it was just jewelry work and wondered why no one was buying Gina's work. He thanked the girl and sat down next to the robber. Jade warned Gina to move away, as he would try to trigger magic, and it could be dangerous. Gina obediently walked away, and the young man hoped that everything would be alright. Jade bent back the edge of the robber's clothes and took the dagger. He couldn't explain to Gina why he was doing this, because he didn't understand how successful it would be. But he had no choice but to try. Panting and frowning intently, Jade began to make an incision with a dagger on the robber's chest. He thought that the incision should be made larger so that the magic stone was at the level of the heart. Jade clenched his teeth in annoyance, mentally telling the stone to work. The wound was supposed to heal, and in the end it turned out that way. One of the ways to get SP was to cast a curse and eliminate evil, and a stone with a magical pentagram, which Gina made, can help Jade in this. It was the curse of reversibility. Bandits who fainted could be handed over to the guild and torn to pieces in court. But since these people are engaged in human trafficking, there may have been an organization that was above them. The magical tools were created precisely to interrogate the bandits personally and find out all the details. When he was done, Jade wiped his forehead and exhaled in relief. It was thanks to Gina that Jade was able to finish what he started on time. He turned to the girl and thanked her, saying that he would not have succeeded without her. The happy girl replied that she was very glad that everything worked out. Turning around, Jade said that it was time for them to go to the guild, but before that, the young man would like Gina to help him hunt slime. She immediately agreed to help him, saying that she would do it without any problems. Having already returned to the guild, Jade started filling out some papers when Ramon walked past him carrying a large barrel. He turned to the young man and asked what he was doing here. When Jade saw Ramon, he exclaimed joyfully. The young man told Ramon that he had bought equipment today and completed the mission. The man asked him how much he got for it. Jade said that he doesn't remember exactly, but it seems he got about 400 million. Hearing this, Ramon dropped the barrel to the floor in a daze. He asked in shock what the young man had done to earn such a huge sum. Jade nonchalantly replied that he hadn't actually done anything special. Counting off his fingers, he began to list all the things he had done today. Jade mentioned that he eliminated the Shadow Fighter and the Snake, sold the Phantom Core, for which he was given 3 million. When Jade mentioned the Phantom Core, Ramon gaped in shock. He trembled when he realized that the young man had been able to defeat the Phantom. Jade awkwardly said that he had somehow succeeded, of course. Ramon said there were rumors that the core was more difficult to eliminate than the dragon itself. He was outraged that Jade was talking about such things so simply. Picking up the barrel from the floor, he told Jade that his story simply struck him to the depths of his soul. Hunched over, Ramon began to leave, whimpering softly that Jade had earned as much as 400 million at the snap of a finger. Gina, standing next to the young man, heard his conversation, and after that quietly addressed him, asking how many months he was able to sell everything he received during his missions. Jade was a little puzzled by this question and replied that he had done it all in one day. Gina was stunned, because Jade was able to earn as much as 400 million gold in one day. She muttered that it wasn't even a tenth of her monthly salary, because she was just always in the red. Jade scratched the back of his head, thinking that he was even embarrassed in front of Gina. Soon they were approached by a girl with a square, who awkwardly apologized to Gina and Jade for having to wait. She said that they had finally finished exploring the bandits' magical equipment. Pointing to the side, she asked Jade and Gina to follow her. This girl took a very responsible approach to work. She led them to a table on which the bandits' equipment was laid out, and told them that many of these things had been stolen, so if they saw their belongings among them, they could take them away. Noticing something, Gina sighed in surprise. She ran to the table and grabbed the hat lying on it, exclaiming enthusiastically that it was her hat. Jade was also delighted and said it was good that they were able to find her. Putting the hat on her head, Gina said that she really liked it. The girl who had brought them here bent over the table on which the map lay and showed them where they had found the robbers. Jade told her that there were 3 of them then, and one of them used a magic spell to stun and escaped. Closing his eyes, Jade activated the search and tried to look for the thief, but I couldn't find him because he was probably still asleep. The girl with the square told Jade that he would do a great job with this case. The young man asked confusedly if she was sure that he would be able to do it. The girl told him that she hadn't even thought of any other name except Jade. She exclaimed admiringly that yesterday Ramon told her about the success of the young man on Missy because he was able to eliminate the most earth-shaking with one finger. Jade hesitated and awkwardly scratched the back of his head. The girl said that she wanted to officially ask Jade to deal with the escaped bandit. That is, to find him and eliminate him, because she will ask Jade for an adventurer to spy on. She added that the young man's reward will vary depending on the time and rank of this bandit, so Jade needs to catch him as quickly as possible. The young man thanked the girl with a smile for entrusting this task to him. At the hotel, Jade rented a room for Gina and 2 additional rooms for meetings and work. While in Gina's room, Jade asked her if she really wanted to do it today. Getting ready for work, the girl told him not to worry, because in 3 hours everything would be ready. Jade thought that 66 grand in 3 hours was a lot, so Gina did a great job. Jade placed 2 sheets on the table, one with a sketch of a magic stone made of slime, and the one to his left with a sketch of an eagle magic stone. Gina replied that she understood everything and sat down at the table, starting work. Jade smiled at her. As he was approaching the door of the room, Gina called out to him. Hearing her, Jade turned around and asked what happened. Gina smiled at him and thanked Jade from the bottom of her heart for everything he had done for her. She said she was incredibly grateful to the young man. Jade smiled back at her and left the room with a soft creak of the door. He thought that this laziness would never end. His first day as an adventurer had finally come to an end. Jade knocked on the wooden door of the cabin with his fist, waiting for permission to enter. But in response, there was silence outside the door. After waiting a little longer, Jade cautiously opened the door and looked into the room. After opening the door and taking a couple of steps outside the room, he froze a little shocked, his mouth hanging open in surprise. In the house, he found Gina sleeping peacefully on the bed, snoring at the same time. Jade walked over to the bed and looked at the sleeping girl. Apparently, she was having a good dream, because she was smiling happily in her dream. Sighing, Jade thought with a smile that Gina was so overworked with work that she fell asleep right at her workplace. There were 2 boxes of magic tools on the table, which Gina had made at Jade's request. He picked up the tools and noticed that they were absolutely identical. Taking his tools, Jade left a bag of money on the table. The young man decided that he would not wake Gina, since she was so tired, so he left her reward for her work right on the table. Jade was walking down the street with great enthusiasm. He said with a smile that he hoped that today he would be able to increase his SP with the help of magical tools that Gina had created. The young man thought about the fact that he had 66 standard tools with him and 1 tool for a wide range of actions, used for strong enemies. This tool was called a threat zone. It is practically not used in attacks. It is prohibited for beginners by professional adventurers for the reason that it is very rare and there is practically nothing to replace it. However, if a person has the ability to control these types of tools, then they can easily summon phantoms and increase their SP. Suddenly, Jade stopped and shuddered, thinking about the types of tools. He was stunned to think that he had screwed up very badly by taking on another task with magic tools. The young man fell to his knees and hit the ground with his fists. He sighed and thought dejectedly that he would not get the magic stone today because he had made such a mistake. After a while, Jade calmed down and went into the forest in search of magical creatures. Looking around, he was surprised to notice a pond, on the water surface of which the glare from the bright sun was reflected. The young man went to the shore of this reservoir and realized that it was a lake. Previously, Jade had thought that he would find magical creatures here, on which he would use his new magical tools and complete the task. Suddenly, Jade broke out of his thoughts, noticing that something was wrong. Waves appeared on the previously calm water, and the young man began to guess what it was. With a loud splash, the water rose several meters into the air towards the unsuspecting bird that was flying over the lake. It was a divine arrow. It attacked the bird and pierced it. After that, she dived into the water, dragging her prey with her. Jade chuckled and summoned a magic tool to fight the divine arrow. He couldn't even think that he could meet such a monster here. The young man tensed, preparing the instrument for attack. He activated the tool. He instantly defeated the divine arrow, whose lifeless body floated to the surface. Jade thought he was really lucky. Having pulled both the divine prey and her prey ashore, Jade was satisfied. After removing the bird, he squatted over the second monster and took out a knife. The young man knew that first he needed to process the divine arrow, so he began to deftly wield the knife. After processing the divine arrow, Jade picked it up and looked at it. He thought that after processing, the divine arrow could be used as a weapon. The young man suddenly tensed and looked away. Jade immediately got to his feet and turned his head in the direction where he had just sensed another monster. The young man gave the command to open the status and pressed to use the divine arrow as a weapon. After that, the monster became the crescent blade. Jade smiled, thinking that it would be nice to use it right now. He strode towards the ape-like monster, who didn't suspect anything yet. Every step Jade took raised dust in its wake. Looking closely at the monster, the young man realized that it was a shadow monster. He had never met anyone like this before. Jade narrowed his eyes, preparing for battle. He took the right position and grabbed the crescent blade with both hands, then swung it sharply. While attacking, Jade used the magic of the crescent blade. His strong blow knocked down rocks and trees in the vicinity. The monkey noticed how Jade attacked her. The monster quickly turned and ran at the guy. Before he could reach it, a wave of magic crashed into him. She cut the monkey into several pieces. Jade looked at the damage he had done. The guy cut down several trees as well as stones. He tore down an entire section of the forest with just one attack. The guy looked at the unusual fish in shock and excitedly thought that he had assumed that it was sharp, but not so much. Jade happily thought that it was very cool. He continued to reason that the crescent blade has a special power that can cause shockwaves of incredible amplitudes. This technique is so powerful that it can destroy everything that stands in its way. Jade looked at the sharp part of the fish and continued to reason that it was the divine arrow that helped to increase the magic of the crescent moon. The guy shook the fish and it fell like jelly. Its shape is difficult to hold. Jade thought that she would also increase the effect of amplifying shockwaves, which is very good. Jade introduced the sword and happily thought that no, it was a very powerful weapon, so he would continue to use it but rather process the material and make a sharp sword out of it. The guy opened a portal and sent a monkey into it, so as not to wear it himself. He thought that he would definitely need to find a good blacksmith when he returned to the guild, but for now. Jade looked at the magic stone in his hand and continued to reason that he needed to try to engrave a special pentagram on the magic stone in order to prolong its magical properties for an indefinite time. The guy sat down on the ground and took out a sword to engrave a pentagram. He thought that he didn't have time to go back to the city and ask for Gina, so he would try to do everything right and not spoil the stone. Jade looked at the stone with displeasure and thought irritably that Gina would have handled it much better than he did. The stone turned out to be so small and uncomfortable. The guy put the stone on the ground and touched the pentagram. Jade thought his pentagram came out pretty good too, so it's okay. He said loudly that it was ready. Jade quickly ran away from the stone. He thought that now he needed to test his strength. Seemingly evenly, he was getting further and further away from the stone with the pentagram. He pushed off from a giant rock and landed on a tree branch. Jade breathed wearily because he had to run 10 minutes. The guy thought that now his task is to destroy the monsters that encroached on the magic stone. Jade looked at the various monsters that surrounded the stones. The monsters were big and small. They were of different types, but they were all attracted to the stone. The guy looked closely at the stone with the pentagram and noticed that he was surrounded by bees. Jade thought that the pentagram was almost invisible because of the swarm of bees that formed a buzzing sphere. He paid attention to the boar monsters and excitedly thought that if he counted the boars. Jade noticed the werewolves and thought that if they were counted as well. The guy took out another stone and excitedly thought that adding to this the monsters surrounded in the sky and underground, they would be able to get more than 100 points in total. He decided it was time to attack. Jade tightened his grip on the stone in his hands and pressed down on the magic sign. He said loudly that he was starting activation. The stone vibrated and began to emit magical waves. The guy abruptly threw a stone at the monsters, which glowed brightly. He was closely watching his trajectory. He wanted to make sure everything went according to plan. The monsters raised their heads and watched the stone. They couldn't look away. Suddenly, everything shone and the monsters were attacked by waves of magic that burst out of the magic stone. The magic stone began to shake and crumble from the power it had released. There was an explosion and the stone completely broke. There was no magic in it anymore. Jade carefully watched the monsters that were still running around the clearing. He thought with a smile that was enough. The guy shouted with a smile that he was super. He opened the map to see the number of monsters around him. Jade looked at the black dot that marked him and counted the number of white ones that marked the monsters. The guy thought it was only 6-1. He quickly jumped down from the branch. Jade landed on the ground and touched her with his hand. He cheerfully shouted that it was time to start. The guy was completely ready to start fighting various monsters. The werewolves quickly began to run at Jake. The guy covered his eyes with bangs and said that he was using a hinge attack. He opened the magic screen to attack the monsters. Hundreds of magic stones appeared and lined up in rows. The wolf monsters stopped and looked fearfully at the guy who was very serious about destroying them. The monsters felt the pain when the stones activated. They screamed and screamed loudly. The wolves tried to break free but couldn't take a step. Dust rose, and when it disappeared, the monsters also disappeared. Jade held out his hand and shouted with a smile that he was very grateful to them for the delicious food. Jade opened the screen with a smile. He read that 61 phantoms and SP won 8,300 points. It turned out well. The skill points are 1839. He intently said that physical strength and magical abilities had been increased by 17. The guy ordered the vault to be opened and took out a bag from it. The guy knelt down and squeezed the bag tighter. He waved his hand at Mar once and threw it. Suddenly, the pouch turned into several dozen sharp daggers. Jade shouted loudly to get it. The shells flew through the trees. Jade watched in shock as the trees were cut into 3 pieces and then fell down. The guy did not expect this at all. He was amazed at how easily the trees were cut. The guy clenched his hand into a fist and looked at her with a smile. He enthusiastically thought that now he would be able to defeat the boar. Jade was pleased with the result. He opened the characterization screen and stared at her intently. Jade read that his job as a beginner, XP 222, 222, 222, 230 squel, points 1420. He thought that the remaining Sps P. Jade continued to argue that it was not for nothing that he added more than 10 points to physical strength and magical abilities. He'll take it. The screen asked what he was sure of. The guy pressed the yes button. The guy hid half of his face behind his hair, which made it impossible to see his eyes. He got the Eye of X, his new ability that brought a smile to his face. Jade thought that the X-Eye is a skill that allows you to see everything inside a living body, starting from the work of the muscles, ending with the condition of the internal organs. It also shows the weak points of every living being. He opened the map and saw more territory. Jade thought that in addition to all this, it would be possible to monitor the movement of the target. Therefore, it is considered a very convenient skill. Jade looked at the trees and said that let the search begin. He thought that he would like to test it again before leaving. He noticed something. The guy jumped away from the boar that was watching him. Jade thought with a smile that this was the boar. The monster opened its mouth and showed its teeth. He growled loudly. Jade screamed loudly that he was summoning the Eye of X. The guy ran at the monster, his eyes shone brightly, and an X sign appeared on one and on the eye, which meant that the skill was activated. The guy excitedly thought that this was all the information about his further actions. He should study it carefully. He looked at the monster with a magic eye and thought what to do next, as indicated. Jade quickly waved his foot and ran to the side. He excitedly thought that he needed to move the center of gravity to his left foot for 0.5 seconds, and now stepped to the left. The guy took a step and stood in front of the boar. The monster looked at him in surprise and tried to follow his movements. Jade happily thought that now the boar would lose its balance, and this would give it a chance. The guy quickly ran at the monster. He looked at him with his magic eye and noticed a weak spot on his leg. Jade excitedly thought that it was here. Jade hit the boar's leg with all his might to disable it. The boar screamed loudly and screamed when the guy hit him. He opened his mouth and showed his huge fangs. The boar tried to move on, but his leg just turned up. That's what Jade wanted. The guy looked at the boar's legs and noticed a weak spot. He waved his hand and excitedly thought that there was another one. The monster dropped to the ground and did not show much zeal for battle. Jade opened the screen and took out a spicy fish. He thought tensely that it was going to be a big blow. Now, he won't be able to move for a while. The guy stared at the boar intently to study it again. He analyzed the monster's body and noticed the place to strike. Jaga ran at him shouting that he was using the moon blade. The boar's head just fell off his body. Jade did everything to defeat the monster, but without harming himself. He used his skill to easily slay the boar. Jade jumped down to the ground and looked at the boar's body. He also noticed a crack in the ground, which he also made. The guy overdid it with his strength. The guy looked at him and thought tensely that he had tried to combine both skills, like how it turned out. He is very glad that everything went smoothly for him. Jade took out a dagger and walked over to the boar's body to deal with it. He thought, that's right, we need to pull out the magic stone. He decided to put the glasses in the search. A message appeared that 5 skill points were added to the search. He returned to the guild to sell his loot. Jade showed the boar to Sylvia, and the girl said with a smile that this time he also coped. The guy replied that he was. Sylvia said that apart from the cut inflicted to pull out the magic stone, there were no wounds at all. It's the first time she's seen a man who kills so neatly and cleanly. It's amazing. Jade scratched his head and awkwardly replied that it was due to the skill that would determine the target. He laughed and wondered excitedly if she would understand. Sylvia exhaled and said that once again he was saying something in his own language. The guy thought that she still didn't understand anything. Sylvia looked at the guy and said that, by the way, just don't tell her that this time he brought a phantom core. Jade twitched in fright. The guy spread his hands in different directions and awkwardly said what she was saying. He was just lucky last time. He didn't want her to get nervous again. Jade remembered the girl's first reaction. She thought her reaction back then was just amazing. He decided that he would not do it again, once was enough. The guy created a screen to get a spicy fish. He excitedly told her to listen to him. He found this. Sylvia screamed in shock that it was the same. Sylvia bent over the fish to examine it carefully. She enthusiastically said that it might be a divine arrow. Jade said in surprise that it was so cool. The girl adjusted her glasses and continued to say that, of course, she did not reach the phantom, but the fish was really rare. Jade shouted happily, which wasn't bad either. He really wants to make a weapon out of it. Sylvia stood up straight to listen carefully to the guy's words. Jade asked with interest that she did not know where they were doing nearby. It was very important for him to look. The girl looked away and looked somewhere displeased. She was silent for a few seconds, and then wearily said that she had a familiar master, now she would tell everything. Jade walked up to the Valg factory. The building looked well maintained enough. Everything was in order. The logs were laid out in a turret. The place evoked good emotions. The guy looked intently at the factory and thought that it was here. Sylvia told him that he was skilled, but there was one problem. Jade asked what the problem was. The guy swallowed in fright. Jade entered the room and noticed a man. He said loudly that he was sorry for the intrusion. Sylvia told him that the blacksmith had a terrible temper. The man was minding his own business until he heard the voice of the guy who made himself known. He turned his head and stared at the guy who had intruded on him. Jade took out a fish and said in a frightened voice that he would like to make a sword out of it. He was uncomfortable being at the factory after Sylvia's words about the blacksmith. The man approached him and said in surprise that it was a divine arrow. He doesn't know how he got his hands on it, but it's very cool, he's lucky. Jade was glad that the man was not aggressive towards him. He asked with a smile that he would then take his order. He will be very grateful to him for this. The man smiled and replied loudly that he was fine. After all, only he can handle it. The blacksmith speaks very proudly about himself, he is confident in his work. Jade pulled the towel off his neck and shouted for him to wait a bit. Jade excitedly shouted that yes, thank you very much for your help. He is glad that everything will work out. The guy smiled and wondered why she was talking like that. He's a normal guy. Maybe he liked the arrow, so he's in a good mood, he's lucky. Jade excitedly asked when he should come back for it. He can't wait to see him anymore. The man asked what he could pay him now. He didn't have to wait. The guy was sweating from the shock. He didn't understand what the man wanted to say. Jade didn't understand the meaning of his words, why he had to pay him now, what was going on. Jael wondered excitedly what it was. He stopped understanding him. The guy started waving and shouting for him to listen to him. He should pay, not the blacksmith. The man looked at him carefully. He considered Jade's words. Suddenly he took a sharp breath, as if an epiphany had come to him, and he finally understood. The blacksmith looked at him with displeasure and furiously asked that he was going to use it himself. With this sword he's going to make, he's just ridiculous if he decides to. The man shouted angrily that he would never give it to a kid like him. Jade looked at him in shock and shouted what he meant. He did not expect such a turn of events. The blacksmith loudly added that he was giving him the material, and he was making a sword out of it and using it himself or reselling it to a worthy one. He had never intended to give him the sword. The man put the bag on the table with a loud bang and said that this was exactly what he meant, so he can just go, the sword should stay with him. Jade was simply shocked by this statement. He couldn't move at such words. He thought furiously that the blacksmith was simply terrible. How could he say such a thing? The man took the fish from him and said that if he used it, the sword would just cry. Jade felt that he was starting to break down from such a statement. The blacksmith turned to him and looked at him intently. He asked with displeasure that the guy had heard him correctly. The man said that he hoped he understood him correctly. Jade clenched his hand into a fist and furiously thought what nonsense he was talking about. It was simply unthinkable. Of course, he can earn this sword by bringing a few phantoms, but he brought it. It's not fair. The guy hid his eyes behind his bangs and angrily asked what it meant if he was not weak, he would give him the sword. Jade couldn't accept that the fish he got would be given to someone else. The blacksmith asked in surprise what he was saying. Jade confidently replied that he was asking for a chance to prove it to him. He wondered if he wasn't mistaken about his character. The man asked in surprise that he was sure. Jade happily thought that there was an opportunity to show him his abilities. The guy replied with a smile that, of course. The blacksmith sternly said that then he would fight whoever he chose. The man asked that he didn't mind, even if he got injured, he didn't force him to do it. Jade confidently thought that he could definitely handle it. He had no other choice, he would get the sword. The guy said loudly that he didn't mind getting injured in battle. The blacksmith turned his back on him and began to talk about something. He gathered his thoughts and told the guy to come here in 7 days. Jade replied that he understood. The guy went back with a smile. He thought that he certainly understood his decision because he looked like a child. However, it's still a shame that he was called a weakling. He will show him strength and he will definitely change his mind about him. Jade has returned home. He opened a portal from which magic stones rained down. There were a lot of them, because the guy fought a huge number of monsters. The table was completely filled with magic stones. Gina was shocked to say that there were so many of them. Jade wiped the sweat from his face and wearily replied that yes, I had to try. The guy turned to the girl and said that he was sorry for the urgent request, but could she do everything before tomorrow? Jade thought it was too hard for her after all. Gina proudly shouted that he could rely on her. She can do it in just one night. Jade asked in surprise that seriously she would be able to handle it. The guy shouted joyfully that he was very grateful to her, but he really begged not to overexert himself. Gina confidently shouted that of course, he doesn't have to worry. Jade thought that from the next day, he was going to hunt phantoms from Iriamenas. He repeated this 3 times a day. He did it for 3 whole days in a row. The guy came to a high mountain on which a lonely tree grew. He thought that there were only 4 days left before the battle, and his SP had also increased. He thinks he's practiced enough. Jade continued to argue that now it is necessary to strengthen his data. The guy opened the screen and said that he would add 47 to physical strength and magic. He reached out and touched the tree. Jade stood for a while and tapped lightly on the wood. Suddenly, he hit the tree with all his might to test his abilities. The tree just flew apart. Jade broke it in one blow. The guy picked up a piece of wood and threw it on the ground. He realized that he was doing well. The guy dusted himself off and thought with a smile that it was great. He was pleased with the result. Jade became more and more convinced of his victory. He would receive the sword from the blacksmith. He continued to reason that he hoped he wouldn't fight creatures as strong as a dragon or an octopus, so it's time to move on. Jade opened the screen and said that he would add 15 points to the barrier. The guy stretched out his hand and shouted that he was summoning a barrier. A diamond-shaped shield formed in front of Jade. The barrier turned out to be quite large. Jade tapped on the barrier and excitedly thought that it was, of course, more protective magic, but he could use it in a different way. He even knew exactly how. The guy kicked the barrier with all his might. He looked at it and realized that the shield was completely intact. Jade thought there were enough points for the barrier. Jade went down the mountain. He crashed into a tree and cut it in 2. The guy managed to jump away from him and fly into the sky. It turned out not very high. Then, the guy shouted that he was summoning a barrier. He made a shield under his feet, and when he landed on it after falling, the shield allowed him to bounce off. The guy flew much higher than he did last time. Jade thought that if this was the way to use this skill, he looked admiringly at the houses and the high mountains. Jade smiled broadly and shouted that it was so cool. The guy thought he could fight in the air. He was delighted with his new skill, which he would definitely need. Jade jumped onto the barrier again and pushed off from it. The guy screamed excitedly. He flew up into the sky and then landed on the ground. The guy kicked up dust on landing. Jade smiled and shouted joyfully that everything was just fine. He excitedly said that he was improving X's eyesight to 10 so that the skill would be more useful. The guy thought that his eyesight had become much better thanks to the skill. Jade looked ahead and chuckled. He enthusiastically said that now nothing would be hidden from him. The whole area was at a glance. The monster monkey twitched its ears and head when it heard strange noises. She turned her head and noticed Jade running quickly towards him. The monkey waved his arms and got into a fighting pose. She braced herself for battle as Jade ran past her. She hadn't expected this at all. The guy ran around the monster on the other side. Jade grabbed the monkey tightly by its long tail. The guy shouted that he was summoning X's vision skill. The guy's eye lit up, and an X sign appeared in the eye itself. The guy studied the area with the help of X's eye. He saw all the mountains and bumps on the ground. Jade noticed a high mountain, the end of which was very thin. He happily thought that he had found it. He noticed the right trajectory so that his plan would work out exactly. The guy threw the monkey away with all his might. Jade already knew what was going to happen in the next few seconds. The monkey turned his head to see exactly where he was flying at such a speed. She only had time to notice the sharp part of the rock before she crashed into it. The impact was so powerful that the rock just broke. The stones flew in all directions. Jade froze in the position in which he threw the monkey and began to observe everything that was happening. The guy thought that with the help of terrestrial structures and terrain, you can perfectly calculate the trajectory and deliver a huge blow to the enemy, thereby neutralizing him. Jade continued to reason that, although he thinks he could easily deal with a lower monster this time without this ability, so it's better for him not to rely on this skill. The guy opened the screen and pressed the yes button. Jade happily thought that this was the last one. He said with a smile that he had acquired the skill of protecting a warrior. He wondered what kind of power was hidden in this skill. If he gets this yes, then the accumulated power will be transformed into the strongest protective dome that can be directed against the enemy. If the power scale exceeds the norm, it can be activated at any time. You can use the skill only at certain times. Jade continued to reason that when activated, a dome will form that will protect even from the dragon's breath. The guy imagined how the dragon released its fire, but he was not hurt. He thought that, besides, he doesn't consume MT, which means the power of the skill is 5 times more powerful than any creature. Jade will attack the dragon with a shout to make it defend itself. Jade thought that the skill required 10,000 points, but using them he would be able to raise his strength, thereby strengthening the dome. You can purchase it more than once if its level is above average, but you need to be extremely careful with this. However, it is very easy to use, and he wants to try it out right now. First, he needs to find a high-ranking monster and a suitable place to attack. The guy approached the new monster. Jade happily thought that he had met the giant boar just the right thing. He will be able to work out his new skill on it. Jade shouted that he was summoning X's vision. He used this skill again. The guy's eyes sparkled and shone again. An X sign appeared, which indicates that the skill has been activated. The guy looked at the monster, which began to approach him. Jade thought that the boar was guarding this place, so he would fight to the very end. Jade didn't move, but just watched the monster that was getting closer to him. He thought tensely that he had a high rank. The boar's face was already a meter away from the guy's face. The boar flew into the guy at high speed. Jade screamed in pain. He excitedly thought that this would be just the right time. That's what he wanted. Everything is going according to plan. The monster threw the guy aside. Jade used his skills and looked at the monster. He saw a map that showed him what to do next. Jade lowered his hand and touched the area where his skill pointed. He deftly stood on one hand and was able to keep his balance. He did it just perfectly. The guy quickly got to his feet and ran a few meters away from the boar. He stopped and stared at the monster. Thanks to his skill, he found out that the distance between them is exactly 7 meters. Jade looked at the magic item and said that the warrior's defense was activated. He excitedly thought that there was a 100% chance he knew what to do. The guy continued to reason that he would be able to strike from a long distance using a new ability. Without it, the monster would have been able to simply demolish it, running away at a decent speed. In simple terms, the greater the distance, the more active the skill is. Jade thought tensely that, however, at least the chance of losing was small. Will he be able to destroy it easily? The possibility of his defeat remains. A strong wind has risen. Jade looked at his specs and read that he had XP 51616 out of 52664 and MP 390 out of 390. The boar was breathing heavily. He was just furious. The guy thought it was time for him to act. Jade smiled angrily and shouted that he was calling for the warrior's protection. He glared at the monster and used X's vision skill as well. The guy was ready for battle. Suddenly, he turned his head and thought something strange was going on. He used the advanced search. Wait a minute, is this really it? The boar ran past the guy. Jade hit the boar in the head with all his might. The monster flew into the air with a loud scream. The guy left him on the ground and moved on. He was interested in something. The guy stopped and thought intensely that he was very sorry, but this skill was too powerful for him, so it all turned out that way. Jade stopped in front of a puff of smoke. The dam began to disappear and show various details of the new monster. Jade was able to see the strange horns of an unknown monster, as well as large and sharp teeth that could tear anyone apart. The smoke disappeared, and the guy was able to fully see the monster. He thought it was a devilish dragon. The monster had 4 arms, as well as very sharp claws. Jade was covered in sweat, and excitedly wondered how this was even possible, what he was doing here at all. The guy did not expect to meet the devil dragon here at all. The guy looked at the dragon's face, if you can call it that, and thought that the ancient monster that arose through mutation with a dragon was just a monster. Jade drew attention to the dragon's hands and continued to reason that it was an artificially created demon, raised by monsters with high intelligence in the laboratory. The guy thought that it happened by crossing 2 genes. He imagined a clawed hand taking a test tube of a substance and mixing it with another. The dragon opened its mouth and showed the eye that was inside. Jade thought that defective was how the devil dragon was dubbed, which has weak magical power since it wears a special defined sign. Jade used his special skill and looked at the map of the area. He thought that is, on the surface, this monster would not be able to fully use its magical power. Jade came closer to the monster's eye and thought that the strength of this monster varies depending on the opponent. In this case, he decided to cause an earthquake. If he didn't stop it in time, then everything could be completely submerged underground. He said that he was calling for X's vision. The guy smiled angrily and shouted that the warrior's defense was fully activated. Jade confidently thought that he was obliged to stop him in any way and he would do it. Jade said that he would activate the aura enhancement. As long as the protective field is in effect, he will be able to attack. The guy felt the magic passing through his body. He thought discontentedly, then what is he waiting for? He hit the monster in the teeth with all his might. Jade destroyed the dragon's front teeth. He was able to break them into several small pieces. The guy managed to use all his strength. The monster looked at him with its one eye in shock. He growled loudly and began waving his arms. The dragon was just furious at the guy's actions. The monster hit him with his hand. Jade managed to put his hand forward and intercept the dragon's blow. The monster hit with such force that it managed to break rocks and mountains. Jade looked at him with his X-eye. He carefully examined the dragon's body and noticed its weak point. The guy realized what he needed to do to defeat the dragon. The guy looked at the monster angrily and shot the dragon. It hit him right in the arm and tore it off. The monster fell to the ground. Jade replenished the lost mana. The dragon looked at the man with its one eye. Jade thought it was a monster. He looked at the part of the surviving arm and thought that he was really very strong. Jade looked at the monster with his X-eye and thought that he would have to put more effort into defeating it, and then he would want to surrender himself. The guy looked at the dragon in surprise. The monster opened its mouth wide and began to create a magic ball. He was preparing to confront the man and defeat him. Jade studied dragon magic and thought it was heteromorphic breathing. This is a special type of attack that aims precisely at the enemy, a very dangerous skill. The guy continued to argue that his energy could blast him back several kilometers and destroy the protective dome, but he has a trump card. Jade created a barrier and shouted that he was summoning an eclipse. The monster created a black ray. The dragon decided to use this magical skill to defeat the man. The beam headed for the barrier. He increased in size and flew forward with great speed. The monster looked at the beam that was approaching its opponent. Jade confidently thought that he would not let him win. He stretched out his hand and shouted that he was summoning a charming sphere. He was going to defeat the dragon once and for all. The guy created several shields for the splice. The beam crashed into them and began to reflect. Suddenly, the first barrier burst and began to crumble into small pieces. He couldn't stand the force. The dragon stopped emitting a strong magic ray. He exhaled heavily and lowered his head down. There were huge pits and streaks on the ground after the dragon hit. The guy continued to hold his last shield, which was covered with cracks. Jade lowered his hand and looked at the monster. The dragon trembled in fright. The guy said loudly that he was summoning the sphere. He fired a magic ray that bounced off a rock and intensified. The dragon looked at the man in shock. Jade waved his hand with all his might. The guy jumped up and hit the dragon right in the chest. The monster began to fall on its back. It could not withstand the force of Jade's blow. The boy stretched out his hand and shouted that he was summoning the eclipse. The guy grabbed the dragon's arm tightly and looked up at the sky. He threw it into the sky with all his might. Jade watched his flight closely to make sure that the monster was defeated. The guy got into a fighting pose and thought that now he would finally be able to activate his sword. Jade shouted furiously that he was summoning a fiery blade. Jade jumped onto the barrier to jump away from it and reach the dragon. He thought angrily that he was finished. The guy can't let go of the monster after everything that happened. The monster looked fearfully at the guy who brazenly used such a technique. He began to quickly wave his arms to try to protect himself from magic. The blades slammed into the dragon's body. They passed through it. The monster couldn't do anything about it. He just accepted his fate. Because of the dust, it was possible to see 2 legs of the monster and 1 arm, which Jade had previously injured. Jade quickly began to jump over the barriers that he was creating with great speed. He reached the highest point and looked at the wounded monster. The guy was above the dragon's head. He struck the monster with superhuman force in the stomach, which showed cuts from magical blades. The dragon began to fall to the ground. The monster fell and broke the top layer of the earth, which contained rocks and mountains. Jade jumped down to a small hill and watched the defeated dragon. The guy noticed that a hole had formed in the dragon from his blow. The monster lost his strength and life in the fight against the man who defeated him so easily. Jade thought that he was not as simple as he seemed. The guy returned to his previous hairstyle and hid his eye with the X mark. He began to look the same as before. He continued to reason that he had managed to use the magic of change, but in truth, this mission could be considered a failure. The dragon turned out to be too strong, and his strength had almost no effect on him, which is not to say about him, he was able to take down this monster with one click. Jade jumped off the cliff and thought that, however, points are awarded for catching the divine dragon and the level increases. It turns out that the SP will increase by 200 points. Of course, the amount is not that big, but it can raise the rank. The guy walked up to the dragon's body and said loudly that he was ordering the vault to be opened. A screen appeared. He studied the monster to figure out what to do with it. Jade thought, what's done is done. He opened the tablet and said that he had upgraded the storage to 10. The guy decided to do just that to make his life easier. The guy shoved the dragon into the vault. He made sure that the monster entered completely. He thought that perhaps he would leave it in the vault for now, you never know. Jade went home thinking that he wondered what Sylvia would say to that when he talked about this battle. He scratched his head and awkwardly thought it was time to go back. 3 days later, Jade was sitting on his bed. The guy opened the screen and began to carefully read the information about him. He was very much interested in something. The guy looked at his stats, XP 52664526664, MP 490, skill points 1429. Run. Jade thought that he still had time to raise his rank. He pressed a couple of buttons and thought that hopefully it wouldn't be such a difficult problem. Jade said that the storage has been increased to 100 points. The guy continued to argue that the Spellbreaker, as the name implies, is a spell that blocks any enemy magic, very convenient. Jade wondered if it would be able to suppress the power of the divine arrow. He would really like to know. It seems to him that if you use the Crescent Blade, you can protect yourself from any powerful spell. The guy put on a black cloak and thought that then he would have to practice a little more so that he could use the skill code and become even stronger. His rank is quite high, so the percentage of loss is unlikely. Jade continued to reason so that he could use spells as often as possible. He needs to recharge and use his strength to the maximum, then he will become completely invincible. The guy smiled broadly and happily thought that it was just fine. He couldn't wait to do it. Jade was very serious about it. Jade headed for the mountains. He came back to the factory where the blacksmith works, who must create a sword for him. The guy opened the door with a nasty creak. He entered the room and saw a blacksmith drinking coffee, and next to him stood a tall man with a huge sword hanging from his belt. The man looked at him in surprise. The blacksmith anxiously said that this was the meeting. He didn't think he would come here at all. He excitedly asked what the guy had forgotten here at all, what he needed. Jade looked at him and considered his answer for a few seconds. The guy said that he decided to practice. He asked that the man did not know on which site it could be done. The blacksmith looked at him in surprise. The man turned his back on him and shouted that there was a small field behind this store. He has to follow him, and then he will show him the playground. Jade smiled broadly and replied that he understood. He's on his way. The guy was very glad that the blacksmith did not kick him out, but on the contrary, decided to help him with the playground. Jade, the blacksmith, and a strange guy went outside. They went somewhere in the forest. There was a wrapped object in the hands of the blacksmith. It can be assumed that there is a special sword there. They walked in silence through the trees. Jade walked at the very end and observed the behavior of the two men. There were trees around them. They had already shed their foliage. The guy leaned over to the blacksmith and uncertainly asked Verge that this was the guy he would have to fight. The man looked at him and grunted questioningly. Verge asked what he meant. The guy awkwardly replied that he just felt a special energy. It seems to him that the divine arrow is in his possession. The blacksmith asked with displeasure that he would make it in 2 counts. He was right. He must not forget that he is an adventurer of the highest rank. Hopefully he will not let him down. Jade thought irritably that they even knew he could hear them. Maybe they're talking so loud on purpose. The guy continued to argue that, of course, he is a beginner compared to this guy, but no matter what rank or skill he has, the main thing is to believe in his own strength and skills. Jade thought wearily that, of course, he was surprised that he could understand his abilities and smell the energy of the arrow. He will be a strong enough opponent. He looked at the backs of Verge and the guy who were walking in front. Jade thought that this man, Voik, seems to be interested in a B-rank adventurer, which means that their level is the same, and he is almost as strong as him, but there are some embarrassing things. Jade thought that even if they had the same ranks and abilities, their skills will still be strikingly different, which means that when fighting, they will attack with different strength and amplitude. The guy thought that in this case, it was difficult for him to calculate the opponent's opportunity, but since he got a level equivalent to the B rank, he has every chance. Jade thought tensely that he needed to concentrate. He concentrated on his powers. The guy decided that he couldn't give up and lose. They stopped in front of an old building without a roof. Verge shouted loudly that here was a playground where they could train and fight as much as they wanted. Voik raised his head and excitedly shouted that Verge had not said that there was an entire arena here. Jade was also studying the arena carefully, but he was in no hurry to say anything. They went inside, and Verge shouted loudly that this place had been passed down to them from generation to generation. Sometimes he gives it to novice adventurers for training and competitions. The man pulled out wooden swords from a cloth bag. This is not what the guy expected. Verge shouted that they could use these swords for practice attacks. Jade picked it up and studied it carefully. The guy was trying to find out how the sword would behave in battle. He held the sword tightly in his hands and muttered something under his breath. Voik looked at the guy with a grin and shouted for the kid to pay attention to him. Jade came out of his reverie and asked what it was. The guy told him to take a look. The guy shouted something incomprehensible loudly. He smiled crazily and shouted that he was summoning the magic of the moon. Voik looked very strange when he used his skill. Verge clenched his hand into a fist and shouted joyfully that yes. The man was glad that the guy used this skill. He really wanted Voik to win. Voik waved his sword and brazenly told Jade what he thought. Now he understood everything. The man grabbed the sword tighter and said that he was a B-rank adventurer and strong enough. The guy began to swing the sword from side to side with the words that it was, so be it, he would give in. He did not want him to get hurt. He gives him one last chance to leave the field, otherwise there will be no way back. Jade thought angrily that this guy. Jade furiously wondered why he was talking to him like that and what he was even talking about. He's a weakling. The guy was outraged to the depths of his soul by this attitude. He continued to argue with displeasure that this loser thinks of himself. He was undeservedly promoted. He also wants him to give up, but no way. Voik asked with a laugh that he had swallowed his tongue. Jade confidently thought that if so, he would prove that he was worthy of the B rank, and earned it with honest work, and put the narcissistic sycophant in his place with simple spells. They will see how a simple beginner who dreams of joining the guild will beat up an adventurer with a lot of self-esteem and little mental abilities. Jade thought that so, he needed to check his skills again and count the points. The state of the body increased by 4, which is pretty good, but the magic of the crescent moon is slightly unbalanced. The guy remembered the terrible screams of the wolf and thought that he hoped that during the attack that guy would appear and be able to defeat this runt. He really hoped. Jade looked at the arrogant smile and thought that his advantage was that he was good with a sword, and his physical condition was excellent. It's time for them to fight a fair battle. The guy confidently said that he would not give in to him, he might not even hope for it. Voik shouted in shock that he was. The man clenched his teeth angrily and hissed that he would regret agreeing. Voik looked at him with displeasure and said that he had given him a chance. They faced each other. Verge shouted loudly that there were fewer words, they should get ready. Voik looked at Jade and made a strange face. He shouted to him that hello. The guy looked at him with displeasure. He did not like the behavior of his opponent. Verge shouted loudly for them to start. Voik raised his sword and shouted furiously that he would grind it to powder. The man was completely confident of his victory. Verge waved his sword and shouted that he was summoning the crescent moon skill. Jade looked at the magic blade and thought it was so obvious. He stretched out his arm and deflected the blow. He said loudly that he was summoning a spellbreaker. A black ball formed in his hand and flew straight at Verge. Jade released them effortlessly. The guy remained in the same position as when using the skill. Verge shouted in shock what was going on. The blacksmith excitedly asked how he knew. The man began to shake with fright and surprise. He did not expect this at all, and therefore laughed hysterically. Jade thought he could see that he was surprised. Jade headed towards his opponent with the idea that he needed to be on his guard, because he could not be sure of his victory. He told him to defend himself. The guy walked past Voik, who looked in surprise in front of him. He hadn't expected the battle to go this way. Jade hid his eyes under his bangs and stopped. The guy grabbed the sword tighter and waved it towards Voik. The man looked at him in fright. He was so shocked that he couldn't move. Jade put his sword on Voik's shoulder and said that it was time for him to admit that victory was his. Voik turned his head towards the guy and stared at him intently. Verge looked shocked at the guys who were supposed to fight, and in the end, the winner should be Voik. The man smiled and shouted furiously that no way. The guy grabbed his sword and excitedly shouted that he would never admit it. he demands revenge. Verge and Jade were shocked to think what he was saying now. Jade wondered with displeasure what kind of revenge he was demanding now, and if he had some kind of trump card up his sleeve. He had not expected such an offer at all. The guy shouted to Voik that no matter how much they fought, victory would always be his. The man shouted in displeasure what he meant. He didn't like his words at all. Voik shouted that he had cheated and tried to win dishonestly. He demands that the guy tell him why he decided to fool him. Jade thought with displeasure that he was cheating. Voik waved his hand at him and asked with a sly smile that they should recoup, or maybe he was scared. If he wins, he can ask him for anything he wants, as he likes such a condition. Jale excitedly thought that he was talking seriously now. He turned his head to the side and wearily replied that there was nothing to be done, otherwise he would not leave him alone. Voik shouted joyfully. Verge walked up to the guy and slapped his chest with his hand. He shouted with a smile for him to act. Voik can handle it. This guy uses forbidden methods. He has to show who is in charge here. He must win quickly, and then they will go to celebrate his victory. The man glared at Jade. The guy turned around and stuck out his tongue. He thought with displeasure that there were so many empty words. Of the two of us, he's the crook and the crook, not Jade. Voik confidently shouted that yes, he would do his best to win. Verge shouted to keep it that way. Jade stopped and thought that it seemed that this time he would have to win even more spectacularly than the first time. He wants to prove that he is not a fraud. The guy grunted wearily and stared intently in front of him. Jade nervously thought that he didn't want to do this. He has already come up with a plan of action. Jade shouted and said that's what he wanted to ask. Since they are unhappy with the outcome of the first battle, then why don't they give their all and use the strongest magic spells? But on the condition that if something happens to the arena, they will not charge for restoration and restoration for the bill. Verge shouted furiously that at least he understood what he had just said, but after his attack, not a single brick would move from its place. He added that Jade is too frail for a warrior. Verge shouted angrily that they should fight for glory because of this. Jade smiled and thought that was all he wanted to hear. He said with a smile that thanks for the answer. The man shouted loudly that then they would start a rematch. He screamed so loudly that even those who are not in the forest could hear his voice. Jade looked at the agitated Voik and thought that the reason his weapon didn't activate was because he wanted to understand his magic level, but now, knowing all his weaknesses, he could finally attack with full force. Suddenly, the guy widened his eyes in shock when he saw that Jade had changed dramatically. Jade said loudly that he was beginning to activate the all-consuming energies. Voik and Verge looked at the guy excitedly. They simultaneously thought about what was happening now. Where this bright light comes from, they don't understand anything. Jade grabbed the wooden sword tighter and twirled it. He stuck it in the ground. Now, not only was the guy shining with a bright light, but his sword blinded everyone present. Voik looked at Jade in shock and thought that he had thrown away his blade, but how would he fight with it? The guy didn't even know what to expect from him. The guy spread his legs shoulder-width apart and put his hands on his knees. He breathed loudly and used magic. Jade replenished his energy reserves with the help of skills. He released his power. The guy gripped his knees tighter and released a bright light. Jade used the skill and destroyed the earth. Voik covered his face with his hands so as not to hurt himself. The man noticed a huge crack in the ground, into which a person can easily fall. Voik cried out in shock. He did not expect to see such strength at all. There was an explosion in the arena. The whole building shook and began to crumble a little. All the dust rose high into the sky and began to make its way through the cracks in the building. Jade stood in ruins. He continued to emit a bright light that everyone could see. He turned his head and noticed something. The guy waited excitedly. The guy noticed Voik's hand, which was moving it. He tried to say something, but the wheezing came out. The man gathered his thoughts and began to flounder, shouting for help. Jade walked over to Voik while continuing to release energy. He held out his hand for the guy to take it. Voika did not resist and grabbed his hand tightly. Voika got up, and then sat on his knees and began to whisper nervously. Jade looked at him in disappointment. He exhaled and resigned himself to the guy's behavior. Verge fell to the ground and looked at them in surprise. Verge covered his head with his hands and screamed loudly. Jade looked at him excitedly. He tried to say something as Verga jumped up from his seat and shouted that the monster just ran away. Jade held out his hand and mumbled in surprise. He began to look like before again, and thought discontentedly that for a second, where was his promised blade, he had won. The guy looked disappointed in front of him. A defeated Voik was sitting next to him. He looked very upset. The man did not even have time to accept the first defeat, as the second one came. Jade looked at the disappointed guy and wearily wondered what he should do. Voik did not move, and also sat on the ground with his legs tucked up and his arms wrapped around them. Jade nervously thought that in a good way, it would be necessary to stop him here, but his conscience does not allow it, so it's probably worth going back to his store, and that's what needs to be done. Suddenly, he heard heavy breathing and looked at their source. He noticed Verge, who was tired, and the man was running fast to get back as soon as possible. In his hand was the sword that Jade had dreamed of so much. Verge handed the guy the sword and shouted loudly for him to take it and leave. He didn't want to see him anymore. He couldn't get away from running, so he was trembling. Jade picked up the sword and awkwardly replied that yes. He looked at the new weapon and thought that it seemed to him that Verge had just run away, waiting for his tail out of fear. The guy pulled his sword out of its scabbard and stared at it intently. Jade enthusiastically thought that he was light. He seems even better in his hands. He raised the sword above his head. Jade noticed the crystals on the sword and was surprised to think that this was impossible. He studied them carefully and thought that it looked like a crystal of power. The guy continued to argue that the crystal of power is unusual, a precious stone. They give the weapon incredible strength, making the metal even stronger than it is. Jade thought that they also had one quality beyond the control of other stones. He is very well aware of this crystal skills. He is well versed in it. He thought that it could slow down time, speeding up the attack of the blade's possession. Moreover, if there are 3 S-rank crystals in the handle, then the speed will be 3 times faster, without giving the opponent the slightest chance of victory. The guy reasoned that he was sure that the master had processed it well before putting it up for sale. Jade watched as Voik stood in front of Vereg and tried to explain something. Jade sheathed his sword and thought that these crystals, and especially those of S-rank, were very rare, so they were almost impossible to obtain. He seems to have hit the real jackpot. Verge started hitting the ground and shouting loudly. He shouted in disappointment that this crystal was worth as much as 60 million gold. Voik asked worriedly that he was serious. The blacksmith looked at the ground and hysterically shouted that he thought the brat would lose in the first fight, who knew that he would win. He also won twice. Voik shouted in fright that he couldn't believe he had taken the blade. He's going to cry. Jade looked at him with displeasure, annoyed by Voik's behavior. Jade looked at them wearily and thought, well, he warned them, but he thinks it's possible to come to a compromise. He left the arena and went to his home. The next day, Jade came to a familiar house. The guy grabbed the door handle and pulled it towards him. He was in a hurry to get inside, so his actions were abrupt. Gina was sitting at her desk reading a book. She heard rustling and turned her head. The girl broke away from her occupation to meet the guy. Jade blushed and awkwardly said that he hoped he hadn't woken her up. He seems to have mixed up the rooms, so he didn't even knock. Gina shouted with a smile that no, everything was fine. He doesn't have to worry, it's all right. Gina happily shouted that, by the way, Jane should listen to her. She asked with a big smile what their plans were today. The girl looked very enthusiastic. Jade smiled awkwardly and replied that he had taken the day off today. The girl said with tears in her eyes that she thought they would work together, so she hoped for it. The guy handed her a small bag. Jade said that here she could take it. Gina asked in surprise what it was. She didn't know she had to get something. Jade replied that it was her salary. Gina asked in surprise that she could really take it. He replied that of course. The girl confusedly said that she had worked very little this month, so it was not worth it. Jade chuckled at her words and said no. He pulled the drawstring on the pouch to untie it. The guy decided to show her what was inside. The guy showed her the gold coins and said with a smile that there were only 200 gold coins, but they would earn even more. Gina screamed in shock that there were 200,000. Jane said that yes, this is his salary for a week of continuous work. Gina took one coin in his hands and looked at it under the sunlight. She blushed with admiration. The girl joyfully shouted that she now had gold coins. Jade awkwardly said that it was only a week's earnings. He thinks they will be able to earn at least 8 million gold next month. The girl's brain just exploded from this information. The guy turned away and thought confusedly that in general, if you think like that, they can try very hard to earn more money. Suddenly, the guy came up with an idea, and he happily thought that was for sure. He opened the vault above her head and said that if she didn't mind, he wants to show her something. She may have looked. Jade showed 3 balls and Gina screamed in shock. Gina screamed in fright for him to get them away from her. Just to get them away, the Adventurers Guild told her that it was these pebbles that could cause a natural disaster. Jade laughed awkwardly. The guy put them on the table and said she didn't have to worry. These are just magic stones. He put them out and made sure they weren't going anywhere. Gina began waving her arms to get the guy away from her. She screamed loudly that no, he might not even try to calm her down. She's afraid to even look at them, he should just put them away. Jade awkwardly replied that she should just look at them from the other side, not as a natural disaster. They would be able to work on them well and then sell them at a great price. He looked away and awkwardly said that besides, he could help her, so she didn't have to worry. They are absolutely safe as long as he is around. Gina looked at him intently but didn't say anything. She excitedly touched one of the balls and rolled it a little on the table. Gina excitedly said that since he said so, she could try. The girl took 2 balls in her hands and began to look at them joyfully. Jane thought uncertainly that she had been afraid to look at them only 2 seconds ago. Gina put the stones on the table and watched them carefully. Jade said that if she needed any specific tools, she could tell. The girl screamed in surprise. The guy said that he would show how to work with them. Gina shouted joyfully that then she would definitely need a sharpening tool and a vertical accelerator. Jade replied that yes, of course, he needed them. The guy thought that the sharpener was a magic tool that restored the sharpness of the weapon. A vertical accelerator is a magical particle accelerator, to be more precise. Jade continued to reason that she just needed a stove for cooking, but why? The guy imagined in his head a small stove with only one compartment for cooking. Jade hesitantly asked him to tell him how she liked the food served at the hotel. She's so bad. The girl excitedly shouted that no, of course not. Gina blushed and replied that everything was really fine. It was just that sometimes she wanted to cook something herself. Jade asked in surprise that she could cook. The guy answered her with a smile that he understood. The guy laid out the drawings and said that it was so, the sharpening was on the right. He asked what the accelerator was on the left. That's right. Jade happily shouted that yes, thank you very much. The girl excitedly asked what was going on. He would get these magic tools. The guy grinned and replied with a smile that she didn't have to worry, everything was fine, he would definitely take whatever she asked. Jade thought that he was going to get everything he needed without hunting for phantoms. The guy happily added that he thinks there will be a lot of tools that they will need to purchase before the next hunt. Gina shouted with a smile, which is for sure, but he has a day off today. Jade shouted that yes, sometimes you need to let yourself stretch and spread your wings. The girl said that then she would go for a little walk, maybe buy something. The girl lowered her head and hid her eyes under her bangs. Gina excitedly called the guy. Jade turned around and turned his head towards his girlfriend who was worried about something. Gina smiled broadly and shouted loudly for him to be careful. Jade looked at her in surprise and excitedly replied that it was fine, he wouldn't get hurt. The guy shouted goodbye that they would see each other soon. The guy set off on his way, he was passing by high mountains. Jade turned his head towards the city and took one last look at his house. Jade sat down under a tall tree to rest for a while. He enjoyed the beauty of the mountains and went on. The guy was walking over a stone bridge. He stopped in front of a high rock that blocked out even the sun. One would have thought that she was in the clouds. Jade decided to speculate a bit about his plans. Jade opened the screen and thought that if you climb to the top of this mountain, you can meet many different monsters, but before you climb, you need to check something. The guy pressed his lips into a thin line and continued to argue that he needed to verify all the data in order to improve his obstructive skills, and he would do it now. Jade thought he'd take a look. He clicked on the yes button when the question appeared whether he agreed. The guy noticed the inscription that he had acquired the skill of lowering strength. He went on to argue that lowering strength is a basic skill that reduces the opponent's attack power. It has an important role for novice magicians. It is needed in order to make it easier to attack the enemy. Jade began to reason that there are scales of power. You can imagine a situation where the enemy and you are separated by a short distance. The original power remains unchanged. If you calculate the enemy's attack power correctly, you can reduce the impact and get out from under the enemy's clutches without much damage. The guy thought that, in other words, if you use a decrease in strength, he can not only soften the blow of the attack but also gain time, which will help him defeat his opponent. He continued to argue that, however, this skill is not enough for beginners, since they do not know how to properly balance the attack power, so it is necessary to connect his rank with it and strengthen the blow. He improved the power drop by 300 points. Jade thought that without lowering the attack power to range 50, duration 0.5 seconds, illustrative example, attack power 90, range 16, duration 15.5 seconds, now everything has become clear. The guy excitedly thought about his rank. He was very interested. He said that the rank has been strengthened to 25. The basic level of MP has been acquired, which is very good. Jade reasoned that now he owns not one but several skills at once, but they consume a lot of energy. There may be problems because of this. He thought that, yes, it would not be easy, but he thinks he can find a balance to use them for their intended purpose. The guy looked at his specs: XP 52664 62664 MP 46664 MP 466. The guy warmed up a little and thought with a smile that how many more things he wants to try, but for this you need to be patient and have a high rank. He sat down on the ground. Jade abruptly pushed off the ground and began to climb the cliff with great speed. The guy decided that, okay, enough reasoning, it's time to go up to the top. The guy began to create barriers one by one. He jumped from one shield to another and climbed higher and higher. Jade reached the very top and jumped onto the cliff. He got to his feet and looked at an even higher mountain. There was a very strong wind at this altitude. The guy's raincoat was developing and his hair was climbing into his eyes. Jade covered one eye with his bangs and thought tensely that it was suspiciously quiet here. In any case, you need to be on your guard, otherwise something bad may happen. He closed his eyes and shouted loudly that he was starting a search. Jade stood in silence for a couple of minutes to explore the area. The guy smiled and happily thought that he had found it. Jade took out his sword and waved it. He saw a black rhinoceros ahead. The guy thought it was a metal rhinoceros. His body is completely covered with metal. The monster noticed the man and jerked in surprise. The guy thought, well, it's time to start. He shouted loudly that he was calling for a doubling of power. The metal rhino screamed furiously at the guy who had invaded his lands. Jade smiled broadly and happily thought that it was time to earn some money. The guy removed the bangs from his eye, which has an X mark on it. The girl in the witch's hat asked fearfully why. Her name is Belladonna. She excitedly asked what they were doing here. She was shocked by everything that was happening. The man in armor furiously shouted to Belladonna what nonsense was going on, why the surge had not notified them. The girl replied fearfully that she did not know, he couldn't identify the place. Belladonna thought that her mission was to find the A-rank metal monster and destroy it. The man trembled and excitedly asked what was going on here and what kind of animal it was. The girl thought with displeasure that, despite everything, she had let everyone down. Belladonna began to cry and screamed that it was her fault. Her team stood in front of the metal rhinoceros. Disappointed, she thought that everyone would die here. Jade created a barrier and pushed against it. He flew into the air and shouted furiously that he would destroy it. The guy started shooting magic blades at the monster. The guy studied the weak points of the rhinoceros using his XI skill. He saw that a mark appeared on each of the monster's legs, which means that this is its weak point. Jade landed on the ground. He put his hand up to steady himself and not fall. He looked excitedly at the smoke from the explosion that occurred after he hit the monster. The dust caused by the battle settled down, and a metal unicorn appeared. He was still standing on his four legs, but you could see the scratches. Jade smiled and thought that he was able to loosen his grip a little by knocking out his paw joints. It seems that he has a little time left. If he attacks the monster in time, the chances of coming out of this battle victorious will increase several times. The metal rhinoceros bolted from its place and began to quickly approach the guy. Jade thought tensely that it was time. He knew exactly how he could win. Jade stretched out his hand and shouted furiously that he was starting to activate the power lock. A black sign appeared in front of him, which the guy quickly clicked on. He thought excitedly that this was it. A huge portal appeared above the metal rhinoceros. Jade thought hard about what should work. He was preparing to defend against the monster's attacks. Jade covered his face with his hands and looked ahead in fright. The metal unicorn was right in front of the guy's face, who screamed loudly. The monster pricked the guy in the arm with its horn and then threw it away. The guy got to his feet, but he didn't manage it very easily. The monster began to beat its hooves on the ground and stare at the man angrily. Jade thought it even hurt a little. The guy touched his wounded arm and said that he was starting to heal. His bruised place shone and the treatment process was activated. Jade thought that he had lost a lot of energy. He looked at the rhino, who was watching him intently. Jade went on to argue that it looks like he underestimated him, since his level is quite high and continues to keep up. The guy looked at the scale of his energy and health and thought intensely that his scale was almost full. He met a really serious opponent. The metal rhinoceros screamed angrily. He got so angry that smoke came out of his nose. Jade thought that this meant that it was enough for him to use a couple more attacks. The monster bumped into the guy and pushed him away again. Jade managed to cover his face with his hands and shouted that he was using a block. He crashed into the rock with a loud bang. The guy wasn't badly hurt. He jumped up abruptly and shouted that the block. The guy activated his magic and looked at the scale. Jade thought the scale was full. He said it was time to show the sun his power. The guy changed again and began to look more confident. Jade smiled broadly and released his energy. They thought he was simply invincible. Jade disappeared right in front of the monster's nose, which did not expect this. Jade flew up to the rhino from the other side and violently hit it. The guy hit so hard that an explosion occurred, which caused all the dust and dirt to rise. The metal rhinoceros fell to the ground with a dent in its cheek. The guy jumped up high and shouted that the final blow. He's about to deal with the monster. Jade quickly created several barriers and climbed them. He blocked the sun with his body. The guy raised his leg high and glared at the metal rhinoceros. The guy hit the metal rhinoceros squarely in the stomach. The force was so high that the earth began to crumble, and stones began to fly into the air. Jade glared at the rhino. The guy left the metal rhino in the pit. The monster couldn't move because of the hole in its stomach. Jade moved a little to the side and opened the screen with his characteristic. The monster felt goosebumps running through his body, which spoke of his defeat. Jade stared at the skill points that had increased from 1510 to 650 The guy began to read the words on the screen and think about something. The guy looked at the rocks and mountains, and then thought that he should look at the results right now. Jade thought that the results really surpassed his last battle with the Divine Dragon, and the vault became a little more spacious, but it seems to him that it is still worth improving it. The guy increased the storage to 25. The guy sent the metal rhino to the vault. He made sure that the monster part of the monster entered the vault and exhaled wearily. Jade looked up at the sky and happily thought that was great. An hour later, the skill points are 2011. Jade has worked very hard to get that many points. He also wants to get more money for the monster. Jade looked at the screen carefully and thought with displeasure that more than an hour had passed, and he still couldn't fit this rhino in the storage. It seemed to him that the average time would be about 20 to 30 minutes, but he slightly miscalculated the storage capacity. The guy continued to reason that it was because he was a rare kind of monster, or because the density of this monster was higher than that of other monsters he had caught. Jade pointed at the screen and thought that he would have to wait. This SP has increased quite a lot. This is only to his advantage. Maybe he should also increase his strength rank. To upgrade the increase in strength rank, you need to spend 1,000 points. The guy began to reason that the word upgrade is a general term for improving a skill that increases strength and ability. That's the whole point of upgrading. Jade thought that if he applied and upgraded his rank, his strength would increase several times and then he would be able to easily fight the strongest monsters. The guy opened another page and thought he needed to look at it. If he wants to increase the hidden search, then for this he needs as many as 2,000 points, which is not a little. Jade put his finger to the word yes and clicked on it. He decided to improve the hidden search. After all, he decided that it would be more useful. A message appeared that his skill had been improved. The guy hid his eyes under his bangs and smiled slyly. Jade thought that was just fine. Now his rank is up, it will help him in the battles with monsters. He began to reason that the golden metal rhinoceros. In this area, you can meet monsters stronger than him. They also give you more experience points. Jade thought that he was very lucky, as never before, because the rhinoceros grants strength several times more than other monsters living here. He is very pleased with this. The guy excitedly thought that now with this search skill, he will be able to easily detect other monsters. He will know about the location of all his enemies. Jade thought that, unlike detection, the search skill needed 2,000 plus 3,000 points to upgrade. If everything is summed up, the skill will become almost uncontrollable, and he will be able not only to track, but also immediately eliminate any monsters by taking power and increasing rank. The guy used his power. He closed his eyes and thought discontentedly that the range seemed too small. Okay, he's going to have to go ahead a little bit and try there. A team of adventurers stood in front of a huge metal rhinoceros. The man excitedly thought that they were seeing a rhinoceros made of metal. It seemed to him that these were just legends, but it all turned out to be true. Startled, he asked Belladonna what they should do. They have to fight or run away. What is the best thing to do so that they get out of here alive? What will she say? The girl replied tensely that they needed to leave right now. The man ground his teeth angrily. He couldn't believe they were being threatened by a metal rhinoceros. Belladonna excitedly added that she needed to leave immediately. He's extremely strong, so they can't beat him. It was hard for the girls to say that, but it's true. The man thought furiously that it was a disaster. There's nothing else for him to do. He smiled and said that then he would become a bait for the monster so that they would escape. Belladonna stood in front of the man and shouted loudly that she was not. She will detain him. The man looked at her in shock and shouted in fright what she was doing. The man asked what she was saying. Belladonna replied that she had magic, so she would be able to hold him longer. She has to, because she brought them here herself. The girl tightened her grip on her staff and hid her eyes under her bangs. She turned away from her team and said that was why she was asking them to leave. The guys from her team trembled with fear. The man said tensely that Belladonna should not. The girl shouted loudly for them to run away. The metal rhinoceros paid attention to them, and Belladonna screamed furiously. Belladonna thought that she didn't remember much further. She used a spell to protect the guys, but the giant rhino was stronger than her, so before she knew it, it attacked her and her companions, not giving them a chance to escape. The girl dared into the eyes of a rhinoceros that was running at her. Belladonna thought that she had seen the symbol of death, namely its two eyes saying that she would die. Suddenly, a hand appeared that created a protective barrier. The girl with tears in her eyes thought that her death was foreshadowed. She has already accepted her fate. Jade smiled and repelled the attack of the metal behemoth. Belladonna looked at the guy who protected her in shock. She thought that he had suddenly appeared here. The metal rhinoceros was rushing at people. Jade held out his hand and stared at the monster. Belladonna could only cry out of fear. The protective barrier split after the rhino's attack. Jade tightened his grip on his sword to defend himself. Belladonna opened her mouth in surprise. She did not expect to see this at all. Jade looked at the huge metal rhinoceros and told Belladonna that she was one step away from death. It's good that he made it. The guy made it in the last second. The guy wiped the sweat from his face and exhaled wearily. He said tensely that it would be simply impossible for a novice like him to revive the dead, but this was no longer required. Belladonna was shocked to think that he was a beginner. What nonsense he was talking about. She can't believe what he's saying. She's seen everything he's done now, so how can he say it? Belladonna continued to argue that a beginner should be weak, unable to use force. Could he really use a barrier capable of holding back the onslaught of the golden rhino? Jade created a magic seal and said that he was summoning a decrease in power. Belladonna thought excitedly, what nonsense, he is subject to such magic. The guy stretched out his hand and used his skills. He quickly began to study the metal rhinoceros. Belladonna remained sitting on the ground and watching the guy. The girl was shocked to think what a fool he was. Although, wait, it really works. Besides, his health is close to 90. The monster screamed loudly and growled. Belladonna looked at the guy and excitedly wondered who this guy was. She did not understand what was going on here at all. The girl was sure that she should have died. The monster hit the ground a couple of times. It was preparing to attack. Jade thought that he had accumulated strength in his legs. Unlike that time, now haste can play a bad role with him. The guy continued to argue that there is no effectiveness of reducing strength. He won't be able to defend against the attack with his barrier. The monster prepared for a quick attack. Jade put his hands out and shouted loudly that he was summoning the barrier. The guy excitedly thought that he still needed to try. His task is not to let him improve his defense until the middle of the way. The monster crashed into the shield and the guy screamed loudly. He broke the protective barrier with his sharp horn. Jade looked at the remains of his shield in surprise. He didn't expect it to break so quickly. The metal rhinoceros threw the guy into the air. Jade whispered in displeasure that it was terrible. It hurt so much. He looked at the ground and activated his Xi skill. He was going to analyze the area. The guy touched the ground with his hand. He hit exactly the point that his skill showed him. Jade quickly rolled over and stood on two legs. He quickly grabbed his sharp sword. The metal rhinoceros ran at the guy. Jade exhaled heavily and leaned forward a little. The guy thought wearily that, after all, he didn't have time to catch his breath at all. Belladonna looked at the guy and excitedly thought that no, he needed to stop. His attack power is dropping. If this continues, he will lose. Jade used the spell and shone brightly. He was trying to replenish all the energy he had lost. Belladonna looked at him in shock. He surprised her again. Jade changed her appearance and said furiously that it was time to finish. Belladonna thought tensely that it was the color of gold, and that's what it was. Now she understood everything. The girl enthusiastically thought that she had seen a miracle. Jade pointed his sword at the metal behemoth and said that since the first day of the metal hunt, he was waiting to meet him. Jade smiled and brazenly shouted at the metal rhinoceros to move. The monster looked at the man angrily. The guy pushed off the ground. The guy jumped high and ended up over the back of the metal rhino, which continued to run fast. Jade jumped on top of the monster and tried to stand up. The guy stuck his sword into the rhino. He closed his eyes and exhaled to concentrate on the magic. Jade understood that he had only one chance to carry out his plan. The guy released all his energy and furiously shouted that 50-fold doubling of power he was summoning the crescent blade. The metal rhinoceros rolled its eyes in surprise. The monster began to wave its head from side to side. Jade jumped off his back and stared at the rhino. The monster began to cough and wheeze loudly. Jade landed on the ground, and a metal rhinoceros fell behind him. Belladonna looked at the guy and thought that he really knocked down a golden metal rhinoceros. Jade walked over to the body of the metal rhinoceros. He put his hand on his cheek and thought that the metal covering the golden rhinoceros was called orichalcon. The guy stroked the monster on the metal skin and continued to argue that even the crescent blade could not penetrate it, so he used one of the martial arts, penetration. Jade thought that this allowed the crescent blade to penetrate his body. As a result, the crescent blade not only reached his armor, but also repeatedly reflected off his own body, crushing it into pieces. He went on to reason that if the condition was met, he would be able to hunt golden rhinos. The guy sent the monster to the vault with the words that it was an orichalcon. The girl came up to him and took off her hat. She excitedly shouted that her name was Belladonna. She is very grateful to him for saving her from this unsafe place. The guy awkwardly replied that he was Jade. He's glad she's not hurt. Belladonna said that Mr. Jade, since he saved her, she wants to ask for something about him, but don't take it as impertinence. She still has a wounded comrade. The girl sadly added that if he had a chance, then could he help him? Jade smiled and looked away. He didn't think it was an impertinent request. The guy pointed at the man and asked if her friend was by any chance him. He was worried about this man's wounds, and before saving her, he healed him. The girl excitedly shouted that it was Geza. A man came up to her and shouted that Belladonna was here. He asked in a frightened voice that she was all right. The girl shouted that yes, and he was fine too. Belladonna said with tears in her eyes that everything was fine, really good. They knelt down in front of Jade. Geza said that he not only healed his wounds, but also saved Belladonna. He is incredibly grateful to him. Jade awkwardly replied to make them look up. In truth, he did it just to get a place to mine the material. Jade confusedly added that, in general, he was just looking for golden rhinos in these surroundings. He didn't feel very comfortable telling his purpose. Geza shouted in shock that the search did not reflect that he was hunting. Belladonna added that the golden rhinos. The guy replied that yes, in fact it is. Half an hour ago, Jade was standing on a rock and trying to see something. He complained that it was impossible to see anything, but it was a pity, he would really like to. He looked down and noticed a group of people standing in front of a large rhinoceros. Jade said that these were the previous guests. The guy cried out excitedly. The guy noticed how 3 guys ran away in different directions. Belladonna was left standing alone in front of the monster. He thought with displeasure that they had left her alone and run away. Jade continued to reason. When they see that the magic of interference is repelled, they will not have a reduction in invalid penetration, so. He noticed a guy on the ground and wondered what had happened to the man who looked like a tank. Jade jumped off the cliff and said that whether he intercepted the prey or not, maybe he could help at the same time. Jade shouted proudly that that was how it was. In fact, he was there by accident. Fate, what to say, he just happened to see it, and that's it. Belladonna and Geza looked at each other in shock. The girl excitedly said that she would meet the daredevil who defeated the golden rhinoceros. Geza got up on one knee and said that they were really lucky. The man said that it was a shame to admit, but they were classified as hunters of the class. Since he helped them out so much, he can get a reward from the guild. He doesn't mind following them to the guild. Jade replied with a smile that there was no problem. He thought that he should follow them even though he had already hunted, but it didn't matter. He said they had to come down from the mountains first. Jade walked ahead of Belladonna and Gaze. The couple walked together and looked at the natural beauty. They didn't say or discuss anything, they were still shocked after everything that happened. Belladonna stared at the guy's back. The girl wanted to ask something, but still couldn't gather her thoughts. Jade didn't notice her agony. The girl sighed awkwardly and excitedly said that she might ask Mr. Jade something. The guy stopped and asked with interest what is it? Belladonna looked away so as not to see the guy's face. She excitedly said that she really wanted to talk about the recent battle. She is very much concerned about this topic. The girl said that among daredevils like them who deal with metal monsters, there are rumors that the golden metal rhinoceros diffuses all obstacles. She went on to say that she would like to believe that it was all a lie, but he instantly blocked all their spells, including power reduction. He already knows everything about the outcome of the case. Belladonna cried out in alarm, and that's it. What he released turned out to be effective. The girl hesitated a little and was silent for a few seconds, which is the right way to put it. She spoke loudly that his strength was decreasing. Jade excitedly said that it was such a skill. He is surprised that the golden metal rhino diffuses all obstacles. Belladonna cried out in surprise that he had such a skill. She was very impressed by this. Jade turned away and awkwardly said yes, he thought things weren't going well. The guy thought that for sure if the golden rhino does not have an instant fix, he won't accept any interference spells, he's more than sure of that. Jade continued to reason that there is one thing, but intervention spells added later are effective, and monsters can no longer diffuse obstacles. The guy grabbed his chin and thought tensely that up to this point there had been so few answers. At what stage in this world the NSO will be, it is very interesting. Jade began to reason that soon after the realization of the golden metal rhino, into a world that has never been updated before, rumors of repelling all attacks spread everywhere. The guy opened the screen and thought that they had wounded, so he needed to get to the guild as soon as possible. He has to make sure. The guy read the chronicle, the curse of Andan and the problems. He thought happily that it had worked out. Jade read that parallel prison, the required skill level is 140 points, you need to choose on or not. The guy thought that at the end of the list of acquired skills, Jade went on to speculate that new skills would be added after the world was updated. He chose the answer option, yes, and saw a message that a parallel prison had been received. Belladonna grabbed her staff and shouted loudly for Mr. Jade to look ahead at the monster. The guy looked up from the screen and looked at the girl excitedly. Gaiza said furiously that they didn't have the strength to fight from a distance. Belladonna replied wearily that the mister would also be cut out. It looks like they're in trouble. A giant monkey was running at people. Jade thought it was a shadow monster, he got it right. He couldn't try it on the golden rhino, so it's pointless, but he should try it. Jade stretched out his hand and created a magic circle that should help him in battle. The guy shouted furiously that he was calling for a parallel prison. A black portal appeared above the monkey, which completely blocked out the sun. The monster sensed something was wrong. He raised his head and looked at the portal in surprise. He quickly began to pull the monkey inside. Half of the monster's torso has already disappeared into the portal. Belladonna screamed in shock that he had disappeared. Gaiza excitedly asked what had happened here. The guy ran at the monster and quickly pulled out his sharp sword. Jade shouted furiously that he was using the crescent blade. He waved his sword and released the sharp blade. The monkey completely disappeared into the portal. Suddenly, the portal spat the monster back out. The monkey looked at the ground in shock. He couldn't understand what was going on. Jade stood next to his new companions and watched the monkey's reaction. The monster looked at the man who had done all this to him in surprise. Suddenly, the upper part of the monkey just disappeared. Jade hit him with the blades. He defeated a strong monster again without much effort. The guy is getting stronger. Belladonna and Gaiza looked at a part of the monkey's body in shock. They couldn't even imagine that such a thing was possible. Jade put away his sword and exhaled wearily. Gaiza excitedly shouted what kind of new skill it was. He had never seen it. Belladonna screamed that she didn't even have time to see anything. The guy looked at them awkwardly. Jade thought that this skill was just rare. Few people knew about it. The guy thought with a smile that this skill was called storage. He thought he could help with the golden rhino. Belladonna excitedly said that this was his skill. It seems that the skill he used in the battle earlier by reducing his strength is also quite special. Gaiza said in shock that he was apologizing for such a question. The man excitedly asked what his profession was. He really wants to know. Jade replied with a smile that he was an unemployed beginner, that's all. Belladonna thought he had already said that. Gaiza looked at the guy, but did not comment on his answer. It was evening, and the lights had already been turned on in the guild. Sylvia was sitting at the bar when she heard footsteps. She opened one eye to look at the late-night guests. Sylvia got up from her chair and asked in surprise what was going on. She excitedly asked who he had brought. The girl couldn't understand what was going on. Gaiza replied loudly that they would explain everything to her now. The sun had completely set below the horizon by the time they told her everything. The story was long enough to tell everything quickly. Sylvia stared at them intently and then exhaled wearily. The girl said that after the ghostly beast, there was also a golden rhinoceros, and in the end, Mr. Jade saved her A-rank guildsman. Sylvia said that if you remember Jade's achievements earlier, then the story they told looks like the truth. Then according to the rules of the guild, she has to do something. Jade raised his hand and opened the vault. He excitedly said that they could now look at the evidence. The guy decided to show the girl everything. He shouted joyfully for her to come closer and take a look. Sylvia screamed in fright and ran up to him. she shouted to everyone that she was asking them to go outside. Jade laid out 3 metal rhinoceroses on the ground, as well as 1 huge golden rhinoceros. The sight was frightening enough for a simple person. Sylvia crouched down in front of the monster's body and excitedly asked how many there were. They said so there. She looked at the monster's leg and said that there were no wounds on the golden rhinos. The girl looked at Jade. He awkwardly said that their bodies were just cut into small pieces. The guy excitedly asked what he could not explain. Sylvia asked if their outer shells were made of orichalcon. The guy happily replied that it was. He thought that the material from the outer shells was perfect, so he wanted to sell them. They returned to the guild, and the girl wrote something down. Sylvia said that, so, they buy everything except golden rhinos. She asked that she understood everything correctly. Jade awkwardly said yes. Sylvia added that when he receives the set amount in the main building, he must inform her. She asks for it very much. The guy replied that he was. He thought tensely that she was angry every time her water was muddied. The guys went outside to talk. Belladonna told Jade that they had sent a report on the incident to the guild. He will receive a reward for the problems they have caused. The guy replied with a smile that he understood. The girl excitedly added that she was very grateful to Mr. Jane for saving them from danger. She is very glad that everyone was alive and unharmed. Jade awkwardly waved his hands and shouted that they had been thanking him for 10 minutes. He thought that although I would not refuse the reward, there was no extra money. Gaiza said with a smile that they are not like him, Mr. Jane, when they come face to face with golden rhinoceroses. He's just an amazing fighter. Jade waved goodbye. Jade and Gaiza did the same. They wanted to get home as soon as possible and get some rest. They've been through too much. The guy returned to the guild and met Sylvia with a lantern. She said with a smile that Mr. Jade should know that the money had run out. The guy looked at her awkwardly and said that he was asking for goodbye. The girl happily replied that everything was fine. Jade followed Sylvia, who was lighting his way. They went into a room where a beautiful tapestry hung on the wall, and there was a small table next to it. Sylvia sank to the floor. She was looking for something intently. Jade looked at her in surprise. He couldn't figure out what was going on here at all. Sylvia found a button that was hidden in the room. She pressed it and the floor began to move apart. It turns out that there was a secret passage to another place in the room. The girl said with a smile that it had been a long time since she had opened this passage. Jade didn't answer her. He thought that there was even such an unusual place in the guild. They went down the stairs and into the hallway. Sylvia said with a smile that she thought he had already heard about it. The adventurer who saved the Ranka group receives a reward from the guild. Initially, they did not believe it, so they wanted to double-check everything and investigate. Sylvia went on to say that since it was almost impossible to kill a monster of the highest rank, but then they personally made sure that the golden metal rhinoceros was defeated by the magic of an adventurer. The girl stopped in front of a wall with another secret passage. She spoke loudly for the door to open. Sylvia told Jade that on behalf of the guild she wanted to reward him with equipment for saving their group. Sylvia showed him a room that was completely filled with various weapons and armor. Jade looked at it all and said, "Thank you very much." The girl said that he can choose whatever his heart desires. The guy studied the room more closely and opened his mouth in surprise. He had never seen so many weapons in one place. Sylvia smiled as she went inside. Jade finally went inside and looked at everything. He looked at the old sheet and said that it was so cool. The guy also noticed a pair of gloves on the shelf. He looked at the helmets and thought that there were so many things that could be useful, and he had already seen many of them somewhere. It is just in an amazing place. Jade took a book from the shelf and looked at it. Suddenly, he noticed something. He turned his attention from the book to a more magical thing that could be useful to him. There was an ornament in the box. It turned out to be a very beautiful pendant with a large stone. Jade excitedly began to reason that this was what he was thinking about. The guy took the box with the amulet and approached Sylvia. He said he would take it. The girl excitedly asked what it was. At first glance, it was some kind of glass that had no magical properties, wasn't it? They went back upstairs. Sylvia asked him if he was sure that of all the things he wanted to take it away. Jade replied with a smile that yes, because of all the choices he lacked, that was exactly what he needed. Jade thought that the Cashback 50 is a very powerful item that returns 50% of energy when acquiring a new skill. And as an additional bonus, SP can be doubled twice after he acquires or improves his skill, a very indispensable thing in leveling up the rank. Sylvia excitedly said that since he had chosen this trinket, it meant that it was really very valuable. It is a pity that they did not know its properties and thought it was an ordinary accessory. Jade scratched his head and awkwardly replied that he was sorry for taking her away from them. The The guy didn't want to upset Sylvia, but he really needs the pendant too. They returned to the main room, and Sylvia happily replied that everything was fine, he didn't have to worry. By the way, after the fight with the rhino, the guild decided to raise his adventurer rank. Jade shouted admiringly, which is cool. The guy picked up the card and said that he now has the rank of E. It turns out that he will rise and become the rank of D. Sylvia shouted with displeasure that what he thinks of them, let him take higher. The girl showed him the map and joyfully shouted that now he has the C rank, which means that from this minute he is promoted to 2-star, which has a lot of privileges. The girl pointed to the document and told him that she had already completed everything, so he needed a signature to make the consent form active. Jade hesitantly replied that he was. He thought excitedly that he couldn't believe he was doing this. Sylvia exhaled and said that he and A rank were just around the corner, but for this it would be necessary to follow several rules, among some to go on a mission accompanied by an adventurer. The guy thought that for sure. It turns out that in order to get rank A, you just need to go on a mission with someone from the guild. Sylvia spread her hands and said that in his case, it was much easier to get an A rank than anyone else. Jade spoke awkwardly. That's how. A girl came up to him. She screamed that Jane was here. The guy turned around and said it was a makeup. The girl said that she came here with some news about him. She asked if he could give her some time after they finished their conversation. Jade excitedly replied that, of course, but what happened? Manga grunted uncertainly and said that they had identified the culprit. That's the way it is. They went into a private room to talk. Manga said with a smile that the identity of the thief had been established, so she came to him so that he would find out too. Jade shouted joyfully that it was very good. The guy excitedly thought that it was even earlier than he had expected. He is very pleased with their work. Manga excitedly said that the report and the reward were in the process of preparation, so she asked him to go through it for her. The girl was very glad that everything was going well. Jade looked at the departing makeup and thought that in fact he was told that the reward would depend on the identity of the perpetrator, something like that. The guy pushed back his chair and sat down at the table opposite Maki. He picked up the document and began to study it. The girl said that they had received a detailed report on the whole situation. Manga unfolded the scroll and said that she was voicing the result of the report. The caught thief is a member of the so-called immortal eternal income. Jade was shocked to think that. The guy jumped up from his seat and hit the table. Jade excitedly asked that there were no mistakes in her report. Manga looked at him in shock and replied in fright that she did not. Manga looked down into her eyes and read everything written in the scroll once again. She said tensely that they had received it from reliable adventurers whom they trusted, so there were no mistakes. Jade sat down on a chair and said, disappointed, that's what it means. Manga raised her head and looked at the guy in surprise. She did not understand the reason for his behavior. The girl took another scroll and read everything that was written in it. She told Jade that this was definitely the work of eternal income. There was no doubt about that. Manga went on to say that they are looking for people in need of money, lure them with high salaries, and then sell them to neighboring countries. They carry out illegal human trafficking. Jade looked at the sheet of notes and said that it looked like Gina's handwriting. Manga confidently replied that it was so. The guy thought she was wrong. Jade dug his nails into his arm and thought furiously that Maki's story was only half correct. For the second half, it's a lie. He's completely sure of it. The guy thought that the immortal eternal income. Their real identity is a hideous cult that intends to destroy the world. Jade knows about this. Jade thought to reason that, as Manga had said, they were also engaged in the illegal sale of people. All of this is limited to young girls like Gina. He thought that those whose price is not high are used for experiments and forbidden rituals of sacrifice. They will suffer during these experiments. Jade thought that the money from human trafficking is massively used for religious rituals and the destruction of the world. The organization that has recently appeared in the game is really dangerous. The guy clenched his hands and was sweating with tension. Jade thought excitedly that at least he knew everything. He feels very vulnerable from this information. Jade thought tensely that at the same time he had defeated a petty thief. The guy began to recall the events of that day to try to find out something important. The guy gritted his teeth and thought that if this was a proper opponent. Manga called the guy over to make sure he was okay. Jade replied sheepishly that he was. The girl showed him a sheet of information and said that this was his reward, and they also added a thief to him for information. She asked him if he was satisfied with the amount of 75,000 problem. Jade excitedly replied that yes, everything was fine. Maki continued to say with a smile that there was something else he needed to know. They have a very good offer for Mr. Jade, he should listen to her. The girl continued to speak. In order to suppress the immortal income, they are forming a special squad. She asked with interest if he would like to join. Jade asked in surprise what the suppression was. Maki screamed that yes, he was completely right. Her companions have heard a lot about Mr. Jade, he is very strong. Meika clapped her hands and said that, of course, if he joined, his reward would be higher. The girl asked with a smile what he thought about it. She made a pleading look and looked at the guy. Jade thought excitedly that, judging by what Meika had said, they did not know their position and military might. He continued to reason that if he stopped her telling a true story, what would happen next, how difficult it would be. The guy didn't know how to do the right thing. Jade put his hands on the table and lowered his head so that no one could see his eyes. The guy thought that was how it was in the game. He can't understand these words if that's the case. Jade looked at the makeup and smiled broadly. He said that everything was clear to him now. The guy shouted loudly that since his name was called he would join in. Meika clapped her hands and shouted loudly that it was true. Everyone will be very happy. Jade thought that he hoped that he couldn't beat even a fifth of the members of the organization. Jade looked at the map and thought that they had distributed the military forces. They have a lot of bases. This time, their target was what was found during the exploration. At first, there were no 8 divisions in that base. Jade stared intently in front of him and thought that now he could strike. The guy was very concerned about everything he knew as well as what the girl had told him. He continued to reason that, of course, there is a certain risk, but as a beginner he will be able to fully master the Lightning Void skill. If, after acquiring it, he gets the opportunity to receive SPI, then he will no longer lose. Jade thought tensely that in the worst case, the adventurers gathered for a military attack would be left to their fate, and still, if he participated, there would be a little more survivors. The guy abruptly got up from his seat and pushed back his chair with a nasty squeak. He confidently thought that it would be necessary to do so. Jade has already decided everything for himself. He's excited, which, by the way, he wanted to ask something. Jade looked at Meika and excitedly asked what day the offensive was scheduled for, he should know. The girl opened the scroll and shouted with a smile that a second. She read the notes and said what was planned in 3 days. Meika asked with interest that he was satisfied with everything. Jane excitedly thought that if he had 3 days, he could accumulate 10 spies. The guy confidently answered Meika's question that, yes, everything suits him. Meika handed him a scroll and said that the place and time of the meeting were written here. He would find out everything from this scroll. The guy held out his hand and replied that, thank you very much. The girl almost put the scroll in Jade's hand. Suddenly, the guy felt a sharp pain. He screamed loudly. It seemed to the guy that a sign appeared above his head. Jade fell to his knees and cried out in pain. Meika knelt down next to him and anxiously asked what was wrong with Mr. Jade. She was very scared for him. The guy clutched his head and looked at the makeup. He thought that just now. The guy replied that everything was fine. He just got a little dizzy. The girl hesitantly said that she had seen everything. The girl reached out to Jade and asked if he could get some rest. He waved her off and awkwardly said that no, he was really fine, it was a common thing. Jade looked in front of him and said wearily that there might be an urgent matter. The guy looked very nervous after everything that had happened, but he decided not to say anything to Meika. The guy ran down the mountain shouting that he needed to hurry up. He thought that a little earlier he had been robbed of his damned guilt. The old chill arose at the moment when something unusual awoke in this curse, and it turned out to be a signal that someone had used it. Jade continued to run with the thought that surely someone had changed the curse and it had been lifted. In any case, the guy shouted furiously that he needed to run faster. He thought that the thief hadn't been taught a good lesson yet, but he crossed the street at an incredible speed. Jade asked himself that no matter how many times you repeat it, it's still hard to get stronger. The guy was getting closer and closer to the city. Jade excitedly thought that he had a bad feeling. He's going to accelerate even more. Gina was walking down the street with a bag of groceries. She looked at the list and excitedly said that it had been a long time since she had bought anything, so why not splurge on purchases? The girl looked at all her things. She blushed and said sheepishly that although she hoped Jade would like everything, then she would be happy. Gina jumped up and down the path and sang a song. She looked very happy. Suddenly, someone called her. The girl stopped and asked in surprise what it was. Gina saw a guy in a raincoat who was emitting magical waves. The man with the crazy expression on his face shouted furiously that he had finally found her. Gina dropped her bag, and all the tomatoes she had recently bought rolled out of it. The girl breathed heavily and thought what kind of horror was going on here. She thought excitedly that it was a human being. Gina watched as the man began to emit lightning. The girl noticed his bandaged face and thought that he was now. The man screamed hysterically that she was caught. He's just going to kill her now, he just looked crazy. The man breathed heavily and stared at the girl. Gina was shocked to think that he would kill her. She turned her head and noticed a crowd of people. The girl excitedly began to reflect that the same thing was impossible in the city. She continued to reason that no, it's okay, the grimoire she made that time. Jade said that besides being followed, he also has a curse on him that prevents him from doing bad things. Gina leaned her arms against her chest and excitedly thought that she believed Jade. A man with a hysterical smile asked her what she was praying for, then he could. He created a dark magic ball in his hand that released black lightning. The man turned his head so that it was fashionable to think that he had broken his neck and could not move. Gina looked at the magic ball in the man's hands. She couldn't take her eyes off his radiance. The man almost touched his magic ball. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation in his body. He grabbed a magic ball and launched it up. The man hit the wall of the house. Gina covered her face with her hands in fear. He grabbed his scarf and shouted furiously, "What kind of magic is this? He's just furious about it." The guy created a new magic ball and said okay. He approached the girl who had fallen to the ground. The man raised his hand with the magic ball high and said with a crazy smile that now he would definitely end it. Gina's eyes widened in fear. The guy began to increase the magic ball in size. Jade shouted furiously that he was calling for the destruction of magic. Gina looked at her savior with tears in her eyes. Jade hit the scoundrel, who screamed in pain. The guy stood in front of Jean to protect her. The girl let out a couple of tears and shouted joyfully that Jade was here. She is very glad that he came to her rescue. The man fell to the ground and laughed hysterically. He smiled broadly and shouted joyfully that it was getting more fun. The guy was really out of his mind. Jade breathed wearily. He was trying to catch his breath after running. He calmed down and spoke, just in time. The guy excitedly asked that she was not injured. Gina jumped up from the ground and ran to Jade. She hugged him tightly. The guy looked in front of him in surprise. He hadn't expected this turn of events at all. Gina trembled with fear. She couldn't believe that such a thing had happened. Jade looked at her excitedly and then closed his eyes to collect his thoughts. Jade said that, obviously, the curse had been changed by someone. It doesn't seem to be fully functional. Gina couldn't let go of the guy in any way, but she had to. She was able to step away from Jade a little bit. The guy grabbed her by the shoulders and said with a smile that this time he would neutralize him. He will definitely protect her. Gina looked at him excitedly and then lowered her head. She asked fearfully that Jade wouldn't lose. She was right. The guy didn't say anything. The guy noticed tomatoes and other things scattered at her feet. He opened the storage room and loaded all the products there. Jade turned his back on Jean and said that everything was fine. Jade turned his head in her direction and shouted with a smile that he would not eat her homemade food yet. He's not going to die. Jean blushed at his words and said it was a promise. Jade swung his sword and shouted loudly that he was. Gina stepped aside and began to cheer for the guy. She was sure that he would win. The guy said that he was calling the Eye of X. The guy looked at the girl and excitedly shouted that he was asking her to get away from here as far as possible. Gina confidently replied that it was fine, she was leaving. The crazy guy created a new magic ball and laughed hysterically. He said with a smile that he could see that he was very serious. The guy angrily asked if he could handle it. Jade calmly said that the destruction of magic. The magic ball began to disintegrate and disappear. The guy shouted furiously that he had done it again. It was already annoying him. The scoundrel screamed furiously. He was just furious with everything that was happening. Jade looked at his magical powers and thought it was rising steam, electric currents constantly flowing through the whole body. Jade glared at the guy and thought with displeasure that the penalty was synergy, the worst kind of body modification. He was unhappy that the man was using this technique. The guy went on to argue that anti-kilty is a curse that stuns the whole body with electric current if you are going to commit a misdemeanor, but if there is a punitive synergy, the current is directed to muscle control, more suitable fights. In addition, the magical power in the body and the current merge together, creating tremendous power. Jay watched as the guy grabbed his scarf and began to emit more and more lightning. He thought that such a modification of the body was fraught with risk. Naturally, such risks are very huge. The scoundrel took off the scarf he had been wearing all this time from his neck. Jade thought that the hellish suffering that follows immediately after the modification is unbearable. 99% of people die from shock. The guy continued to reason that even if a person can hold out, he will become a cripple by the time the effect goes off. The scoundrel's muscle began to grow on his eyes. Jade looked at the guy who had grown taller. He saw how the muscles also became much bigger. The guy still looked crazy, but more scary. He stuck his tongue out at Jade to piss him off. The guy ran up to Jade and raised his hand over his head. Jade didn't move in any way, he just tightened his grip on his sword. Jade used his IX skill. He was surprised to think that after only 0.4 seconds of attacks, how fast he was moving. Jade repelled his enemy's attack. The monster struck, but Jade managed to dodge. His enemy hit the ground and crushed it into small pieces. Jade thought tensely that there was a huge force to all this. The monster looked at him furiously. The monster clenched his hand into a fist and headed towards Jade. The guy covered his face with his hands in fright and also put out his sword. He thought excitedly about what had happened. The guy said that the barrier. Jade's enemy punched him in the stomach. The guy flew several meters away from him and crashed into the building with a loud bang. The monster was very strong, but Jade can't lose. Jade knelt down and grabbed his sword to keep his balance. He clicked his tongue in displeasure and thought that he had not only speed, but also strength. If they fight on the street, they will destroy it. The main thing is that there are no people in the area, but if they change their place. The guy stared at the monster. He excitedly thought that if it worked, the story would be great. Jade said he was opening the vault. A vault appeared, from which a magic stone appeared. The monster looked at him in surprise. The scoundrel began to emit lightning in different directions. Jade grabbed the magic stone and glared at his enemy. He asked with a smile what kind of stone it was. Was he really going to pray now? He tried to hit Jade, shouting that if so, during prayer, he would die. Jade shouted loudly that he was calling for a change. He came up with a plan to destroy the damn guy. Suddenly, the magic stone lit up, which stopped the monster's attack. The damned one looked at the magic sign in shock. Jade thought that the ancient curse could only be dispelled by a change. The monster struck, but Jade managed to shout that he was summoning the barrier. The damned one hit the defense, which is why he couldn't reach the guy. Jade thought that, however. The damned enraged one screamed what he had done. Jade looked at the mark he had left on his body. He thought that he would still resist, but even if he couldn't remove the curse. Jade kicked the monster in the face with his foot. He excitedly thought that his movements were slowing down. The guy realized that he was getting weaker, which means it would be easier to defeat him. The damned one fell to the ground and coughed. Jade grabbed his sword and shouted loudly that he was summoning the crescent blade. He waved it briskly and headed towards the monster. He hit the monster with all his might. The damned one looked at Jadiah in shock. He didn't expect him to be able to strike. The monster felt a sharp pain. Jade looked at the cloud of dust and waited excitedly for it to disappear. He really hoped that the battle was over and he could hit the road. Suddenly, the damned one ran out and headed towards the guy, who sighed in surprise. The monster hit Jade with a smile. He really wanted to destroy the guy. Jade covered his body with his hands, but the blows still reached him. The damned one smiled broadly and made his final strike. He threw the guy away with great force. The monster stuck out his tongue and asked what the current reef was. If so, he doesn't seem to have a chance. Jade closed his eyes and told him to calm down, Kokushi Muso. Jade changed his appearance again. The guy put the sword on his shoulder and said with a smile that this was just the beginning. Jade also opened his X-eye. Jade and Kokushi stared at each other and then smiled. None of them could lose. They will fight to the last, and there will be only one winner. Jade turned around, but still kept one eye on Kokushi. The damned one furiously asked what was just the beginning, if he was exaggerating. The monster pushed off and ran. He was going to hit the guy, but Jade just looked at him. Suddenly, lightning struck in front of the guy. Kokushi tried to attack Jade from behind, but he foresaw it. Jade did a backflip and managed to dodge Kokoshi's punch. The monster split the tile into several stones. The guy flew up into the sky and looked at the damned one. He landed on the roof of the house. Kokoshi didn't wait for him to get off. Jade gripped the sword tighter and released his magical energy. The damned one has released several monsters. Kokoshi hit Jade in the head, but he easily dodged. He doesn't want to get hit in the head with his hand, as well as lightning to boot. The cursed one struck again, but Jade was able to deflect it too. The cursed one began to strike quickly, but Jade dodged again and again. Kokoshi couldn't hit him because the guy was much faster than him, which gave him an advantage. Kokoshi shouted furiously that this was a nuisance. He's missing quite a bit to get in. Jade looked into his eyes and said nothing. The damned one raised his hand and began to create new lightning bolts. Kokoshi jumped high to use his electric balls. Jade shouted loudly that he was summoning the vault. At the same moment, he opened a portal under the guy. Jade quickly took out a magic stone from it. He placed it on his palm and shouted furiously that he was using the change. The guy decided to use this technique again. Kukoshi coughed loudly and screamed in pain. He glared at Jade and growled. He started throwing his electric balls at him to injure him. Jade glared at the cursed one and confidently said that he was calling Cross as capable. He uses the crescent blade. The guy grabbed his sword and pointed it at Kukoshi. The damned one started throwing balls of electricity at Jade. Suddenly, they began to disintegrate and disappear. Jade again noted his ability and prevented him from carrying out his plan. Kukoshi felt pain in his muscles. Jade released his energy and placed the sword on Kukoshi's arm. He watched him bend over in pain. During the battle, they destroyed the roof of the house in several places. Jade spoke confidently so that he would forget about it. He will never be able to defeat him. Kukoshi lowered his head and looked furiously at his feet. He did not want to accept the guy's words. Kukoshi noticed signs of his injury on the ground. He looked at the place excitedly and then smiled broadly. The damned one has come up with something bad again. He raised his head and glared at Jade. Kukoshi asked with hatred that he should forget about it. He's a real fool. How could he say that? Kukoshi shouted loudly that if he couldn't defeat him, he would destroy the star. Jade looked at him in surprise and wondered what kind of star he was talking about. The damned one flexed his muscles and screamed loudly. He began to release all his lightning bolts at once. Jade covered his face with his hands and thought that the force was high density. He looked at his face and continued to reason that he was going to self-destruct. Kukoshi raised his head and said with a big smile that he had lost. He went on to happily say that it was a draw then, but he knows what he can do about it. Jade thought excitedly that he was caught. It is impossible to destroy the stars, but they are strong enough to destroy half of this city. The guy used his Eyesight X skill. He began to carefully study all the characteristics of Kukoshi to understand what he could do so that nothing bad would happen. The guy scanned the cursed one and thought that there were 8:26 seconds left before the explosion. The activation time of the incomparable power is only 12 seconds. He looked at the scale. Jade quickly rushed at Kukoshi, who was about to do terrible things. The guy grabbed his sword and thought furiously that there was nothing he could do about it. He had to confront it. The guy flew up to him with great speed to hit Kukoshi. The damned one looked at him in surprise. He didn't expect the guy to behave like this. Jade punched him in the stomach. Kukoshi tilted his head and began coughing loudly. He was pretty seriously injured. Suddenly, he had to raise his head from a strong blow. Jade kicked Kukoshi in the head with all his might. He was going to finally deal with him. The guy put all his strength and energy into the blow to inflict more serious wounds. The guy threw his head back from the force of the blow. Suddenly, he abruptly picked it up and looked at Jade excitedly. He flew up to him to start striking. Jade started hitting him in the face. When Kukoshi found a chance to raise his head, the guy immediately hit him again. Jade began to throw it against the barriers that he was quickly creating. Kukoshi was able to break away from him and asked with interest who he was imitating. Jade flew after him to catch up. The damned one said with a smile that it was too late. His death was inevitable, right? Jade looked at him with displeasure and thought about something. He said it was true. He'll keep him company on the way to hell. He doesn't have to worry about being alone. Kukoshi smiled for the last time. There was a huge and loud explosion right in the sky. Gina looked up at the sky in fright. She couldn't figure out what was going on. She noticed Jade falling out of a cloud of smoke. He began to fall rapidly to the bottom. The guy looked down and whispered that he was summoning a barrier. He used his last strength to stand on the shield. Jade began to lower to the ground with the help of a barrier, and eventually he ended up on the ground. Jade lowered his head to recover a little. He was able to open his injured eye and looked away. Gina cried out loudly with tears in her eyes that Jade was fine. She reached out to him to grab the guy. The girl knocked him to the ground when she bumped into him. Jade widened his eyes in surprise and looked at the girl. Gina began to cry loudly. She couldn't contain her emotions after everything she saw. The girl stammered that Jade was here. The guy said he was sorry for making him worry. Gina replied that it wasn't a big deal. There was nothing she could do but worry about him. The girl excitedly asked what his wounds were. He was fine. Jade replied that yes, but that's it. They lay down on the ground and looked at each other with smiles. Jade said he was a little hungry. The girl joyfully shouted that she was hungry too. The girl put a plate of food on the table. She cooked scrambled eggs, presented sausages, and made a salad. Gina also served the guy a mug of coffee and bread. Jade looked at the food admiringly and screamed. Gina came up to him with a plate. She said with a smile that here was the soup. It had been true since yesterday. The guy excitedly shouted that it was okay, he didn't have to worry. Gina shouted that it was okay. The guy ate all his food and drank a drink. He said loudly that thank you very much for the food. Today was also very tasty. Gina shouted joyfully that it was true. The girl sat down on a chair and looked at Jade with a smile. She was very happy that the guy liked her food. Gina began to think of something good. Jade asked with a smile that she always smiles when something good happens. Gina turned away and shyly shouted that she wasn't. Is she smiling so visibly? The girl laughed awkwardly. The guy grabbed his cape from the chair and threw it over his shoulders. Jade adjusted his hood and fastened it with a loud sound. He was completely ready. Jade strapped the sword to his clothes. Gina excitedly asked that he was leaving. The guy replied that he thought he needed to prepare for the time when he would join the punitive squad. Gina reached for the box and said that if that's the case. Gina handed him the box and said that if he didn't mind, he could take it with him. Jed asked with interest what it was. The girl replied that it was his lunch. He shouted joyfully when she did, but thank you very much. Gina excitedly shouted that she wished Jade a safe journey. The girl lowered her head and hid her eyes under her bangs. She added sadly that he should be careful. Jade turned his head and stared at the girl who took such good care of him. The guy confidently shouted that of course it was time for him to go, but they would meet again. Jade came to a mountainous area. You could hear someone slurping loudly. It was very tasty for him. Flocks of birds flew quickly over the high mountains. Jade sat on a rock and ate his snack. He said it was delicious. Next to the guys was the body of a metal rhinoceros. The guy thought that, so this is the 20th. I would like to meet the golden metal rhinoceros again. The guy opened the vault and sent a lunchbox into it. Jade thought that, though, this was not the time to think about such luxury. In any case, you need to find Spee in the subway. There was a monster in front of Jade. It was just gigantic. The guy saw that he was made of a skeleton, with a huge eye in his chest and a sharp scythe in his hands. Jade was shocked to think that it was amazing. There was a magical rich man in front of him, even better than the golden metal rhinoceros. If he's not mistaken, it's a rare magical monster with the attributes of metal and death. Jade threw a sword at the eye on the monster's chest. He opened the vault, and it was from there that he took out the sword. The monster screamed loudly. His eye split into small particles, and a magic symbol appeared inside. Jade took out a magic item and thought with a smile that the quality of magic stones from such monsters is quite high. He's glad he was able to get it. The guy went on to argue that the magic artifact is a realizer that expands the range of magic he wants to implement. Depending on the quality, perhaps because of the effect of magic, so this stone is perfect. Jade opened the screen and said that he needed to show the status. He looked at the number 112568 and thought that he had already accumulated enough for today. He can come back and continue tomorrow. The guy went back to Gina. He put a magic item on the table and said that this time he had found it. Gina said with a smile that it was good, but it was a new magical artifact. Jade replied that yes, it is called a realizer. Gina rolled up her arms and shouted joyfully that her hands were already itching. She excitedly asked how many there were. 100 pieces. Jade awkwardly replied that no, so far alone, wow, she has an impulse. The guy put magic stones on a napkin and said that besides him, the stones, as he had asked earlier, were elements for him. The guy put his hand on the table. Jade stepped away from the steel and waved at her. He said that she could prepare for after tomorrow, so don't rush it. Gina shouted that she understood, she would try her best. 2 days later in the morning, Jade woke up in his bed. He looked very tired and rumpled. The guy was trying to collect his thoughts and finally get out of sleep. Jade decided to have a snack. At the same time, he opened the screen and thought that he could immediately check the improvements before leaving. During these 2 days, more than 260,000 SP points have already accumulated. Jade went to get dressed. He put on a t-shirt and thought that if you add up the points from the golden metal unicorn, you get about 300,000 points. If you add cashback, he will receive about 600,000 points. Jade pressed the button and wondered if it was okay that everything depended on improvements. In addition, he will receive a skill that depends on the job itself. Otherwise, it is possible to achieve complete cessation of the feeling of presence for a certain time and carry out ultra-fast movement. It is enough just to master the skill of electric flash. He drank his coffee and put the mug on the table. Jade gave Gina her box. He thought that depending on the situation, it might be necessary to use the skill from the very beginning, so the scale of unrestrainedness is filled to the maximum. They went outside. Gina jumped up and down and began waving her arms wildly. Jade looked at her with a smile. He thought he was fully prepared. Jade went on his mission. He thought tensely that the rest depended on the enemy's combat forces, as well as the forces of the group he would join. The guy met with a crowd of people in a small field. It was surrounded by a sharp fence. People can be divided into several groups. There are archers, and just wars. A man approached him with the question that he was Jade. He said that he had heard about him. His name is Zane. He is now one of the guild members and a former S-rank adventurer. Nice to meet you. He remembered the scream of Meika, who screamed that she was right with her finger. He thought with displeasure that it was a rumor, but okay. The guy decided to calm down and forget about it. Zane shook his hand and said he wanted to thank him for participating in the battle strategy. Now he has become famous in their group. Thanks a lot to him for that. Jade excitedly said no several times. He hesitantly thought that the guy was a former S-rank adventurer. He seems to be very reliable. Zane asked that he didn't know the guys from their guild. He suggests that they get to know each other right away. Jade confidently replied that it was fine. A guy came up to him. He said that they were first. Their group, New Patelgius, is the only universal group of rank A in this city. Initially, it was called simply Patelgius, but recently they changed their name after joining Zargus. The other guy said he was Zargus's assassin. The guy looked at the guy intently and then turned away. Jade thought he was an assassin. He knew that the NSO existed, but they never really come out of the shadows. He did not expect that such hidden people could come out in such a situation. The girl said she was Eris, the leader of the Spearfire rank group. Her friend said with a smile that he was the senior in their group. Nice to meet you, newbie. Another girl shouted that she was Linya. She would be pleased to meet. Her colleague said that they are also a group of rank in Dreadnought. This time, Lin's scout found the thieves' hideout, so they decided to join this time. Zane patted the guy on the back and said that in conclusion. The man shouted loudly that Jade would introduce herself to them now too. They should listen to him carefully. Jade awkwardly said that he was called the first to discover thieves who belonged to the eternal and invincible high income. They can call him Jade. He usually collects metal. He also has experience fighting opponents in hand-to-hand combat, enough to defeat villains, and also uses the power of destruction. Nice to meet you. They shouted in surprise that he had the power of destruction. It has to do with the third explosion. No, after all, it's not like that, right? Jade looked at them awkwardly. He thought with displeasure that they had arrived. He said too much again. Zane noticed that he was uncomfortable. The man shouted loudly that it was fine, so everything is in its place. As soon as they check that everything is ready, then we move out. A group of people were walking along a path between the mountains. Zane made sure no one was left behind. He said that a thick fog begins from this place. They shouldn't underestimate the power of monsters. Everyone shouted that they understood. Linya said with a smile that they could see it now. Jade looked ahead tensely. The girl came forward and excitably shouted that their fortress. Linya told the team that if they got a little closer, there would be a guard force standing there. They must prepare for battle. Zane confidently replied that it was fine. Jade thought tensely that the enemies would be placed, of course, but they were just small fish. If only there were official members of the eternal and invincible high income instead. The guy imagined how the arrow hit the line. He thought that they would have been attacked long ago, even from this distance. They are all safe and sound, which is very good. The girl shouted to Zargus that there was only one enemy in front of him. She created a magic circle. Zargus made a special sign and said that he understood. He will act according to the plan. Zargus began to approach the man, who did not notice him at first. He screamed in fright who he was. Zargus shouted that he was calling for dimensional dosing, northern hydrogen acid. The enemy screamed loudly. He raised his hand up and rolled his eyes. It was obvious that he was in a lot of pain. Suddenly, he fell to the ground in front of Zargism and Jade. He did not even have time to defend himself as he was defeated. Jade thought it was a dimensional dosage. Magic for assassins, which allows a chemical substance to penetrate the enemy's body. This enemy was literally boiling for a while because of the hydrogen acid. Here it is, the power of an assassin. He used acid, but he was not harmed by it. Jade looked away and continued to reason that at this rate he would be able to take down all the enemies at once, but the problem was different. He looked at the castle and thought that the inside of the outer walls. Jade said with a smile that he was ordering the inventory to be opened. A magical artifact began to appear. The guy thought that this was the way out of the object that Gina had created. Jade looked at the magical artifact and thought that it had a terrifying effect on demons, Eliaminas. Expanding the scope of magic is the Elenizer. Using these two magical tools, it becomes possible to capture the base. The guy thought that first of all, he needed to use Eliaminas to avoid the first murder. A member of their team touched the seal and said that there seemed to be no traps on these doors. Zane said it was clear if that was the case, then he was. Jade excitedly shouted for Zane to listen to him. He began to wave his hand quickly and say that he could not wait to open these doors. Zane looked at him in surprise and asked with interest what it was. Suddenly, Jade quickly ran away somewhere. Zane said he was so fast. Zargius asked with displeasure that he could definitely be trusted. Zane said that he had never seen it himself, but everyone who has seen his power unanimously claims that with it he is immediately understood to rank A, which is amazing. Jade raised his head and looked somewhere. He muttered to himself that he was activating the boundary. Zede went on to say that besides, he paused to think about the right way to say it. Jade created several barriers to get to the top of the fortress. He began to jump from one shield to another and gradually get to the top. The guy jumped as a last resort. Jade landed on top of the tower. He took out a magic stone from his pocket. The guy said that Eliamina's. Suddenly, he just dropped it. Zane looked at him with a smile and said with a smile that he was just interested. Just how powerful is his real power? What makes people think so? Zargius exhaled and tapped Zane on the shoulder. He asked with displeasure that he was listening to him at all. The man said it didn't matter if he was interested or not. He asked him if he could be trusted with his life. Zane looked at Jade, who was walking towards them. The man said he understood what he wanted to say. In such an unlikely event, if he opposes the group, he will take responsibility and control it. Jade finally reached them and said he was sorry for the wait. Zane asked with interest that they could already enter. The guy confidently replied that yes. Zane shouted loudly that he was summoning the stone skin. He hit the goal with his hand. The whole team was closely watching the man who opened the way for them. Jane looked at him and wondered uncertainly what was going on here. There is not a single guard. Zane said that with his bare hands, and they are very careless. Suddenly, a team member said in fright that it was the same. He shouted loudly that Cerberus was here. Zane and Zargus looked at the monster in shock, which opened one of its 3 mouths wide. Jael said with a smile that he had dropped Eliamins here in advance. Shocked, Zane said that was why he wasn't attacking them right now. Zargus looked at him with displeasure. Zane told Jade that he wanted to ask him just in case. He knew that Cerberus was behind these walls. Jade confidently replied that yes, his intelligence skills were well developed. Jade awkwardly said that they should move on. He thought that in order to understand the situation inside the wall, on which a high-level magic power is superimposed, it is necessary to strengthen the stealth search to the level of +100. The girl said that tracking is their specialty. Jael continued to reason that Cerberus is the one who needs to be killed first. He imagined the silhouette of a 3-headed dog in his head. The guy pressed his lips into a thin line. The guy thought that Cerberus was modified in such a way as to attack people who do not use special spirits that the monster knows. The guy from the team told his friend that he thought Eliamins was a pretty bad magic weapon. He was told that it all depends on the method of use. Jade walked away from his group and thought that if they reached this place, they would go beyond the area of influence of the magical jamming block. He put the artifact down and said it was an Elianizer. Jade knelt down and released some energy, saying that he was calling for a method of destruction. He thought that by doing this he would expand the magic and then destroy the magic circle. Great, the reaction went. He hit the bullseye. Zane leaned over to him and asked with interest what was going on this time. The doubled watchdog method. Jade excitedly replied that you could say that. Jade began to reason that there is a possibility that improved people are being created at this moment, as well as their combat power increases, which is simply amazing. He thought that now everything would depend on the circumstances. The minimum measures have been completed. The girl asked Zane what he had just said. The guy replied that he didn't even know, but it was something similar to the watchdog method. The group stood in front of the guy who was sitting on the destroyed building. Jade thought it was finally a fight with a regular and highly paid official member. A man with stripes on his face shouted for them to stop. He furiously asked where they came from. Zargus stretched out his hand and shouted that the medicine was from another dimension. The man looked at him in surprise. Zargus shouted that he was summoning hydrogen peroxide. The man smiled broadly and laughed. He jumped up from his seat and shouted that he was in a hurry to disappoint them, but the poisons did not work on him. Zargus glared at the scoundrel and furiously said that he was a goofball. Jade said with displeasure that he was just mocking her. He must not believe him, otherwise it will be bad. Jade thought that this had already happened when they confronted each other on the NSO. People like him use the destruction method without casting a spell, thereby making them nervous. Jade told Zargus that he was only using this technique now. The guy thought excitedly that he was definitely seeing something, but there was something. He went on to argue that the effect of the destruction method is created for the first time when the technique directly affects the magic or skill of the opponent, the main components. Jade thought that in the case of the medicine from another dimension, it's just a lot of invisible magic. She stays that way until the magic manifests in the body, but the guy continued to argue that magical vision. If you have this skill, it will take a lot of magic power before the effect manifests, but you can visualize and capture it. Jade looked at the guy from the gang and thought that the person in front of them had high combat power due to skills that were difficult to acquire naturally. He thought that the combination of magical abilities, which includes magical vision and the method of destruction, is not something special. However, more information may be needed to assess the strength of the enemy. It might be worth trying to start a psychological game. Jade pointed his finger at the guy from the bad gang and shouted that he had tamed Cerberus. If he doesn't get out of here, he'll turn it against him. The man sighed in shock. The bandit asked in fright what he was saying now. He was covered in sweat, and his eyes also betrayed his fear. Jade thought with a smile that this was what was needed. Jade thought that an immortal member of the high-dose structure was able to penetrate the magic barrier and search inside the base. He has now confirmed that Cerberus is alive thanks to tracking magic. Jade looked at his companions and thought that, in other words, they came this far without killing Cerberus. His new friends stared at the gang member. The guy continued to argue that this is why he does not even doubt that he really took Cerberus under control. One of the most powerful members of the organization. He may realize his devotion, but now, based on his reaction, we can say that the real strength of this man is not so great. Jade grabbed his sword and thought that even comparing with the experience in the NSO, there was no need to use the greatest figure here. The team stood behind the guy. Jade shouted to Zargus that when he used magic, he needed to use medicine from another dimension once more. The guy replied that he understood. Zane shouted to his comrades that it was great, they would attack at once, but they should not interfere with each other. The guys shouted that they understood. The bandit thought furiously that this was a setback. Because of this boy, he now needs to keep an eye on Cerberus's position all the time. He was very angry when he found out about it. Zane shouted loudly that besides Jade and Zane, the defense should also join the battle. They will be able to win, and most importantly, so that no one gets hurt. Zane shouted that the whole team should go into battle. Everyone rushed at the bandit. They looked very confident. Everyone had a weapon with them, which they handled best. The archer shouted that he was using destructive beams. The girl shouted that she was summoning a sickle-shaped blade. The whole team used different skills. The girl grabbed her staff and screamed that it would form a glass ball. She began to create a magic ball. Her friend shouted that he was using instant freeze. The muscular guy shouted for him to spider his platinum punch. The guy from the team screamed that he was summoning the spearhead that would defeat him. All at the same time, she hit a member of the enemy gang. Everyone ran to a safe distance so that they would not be hit by the explosion that occurred after the joint attack. Zane stared intently at the cloud of smoke. Jane was also just watching what happened to the enemy. Zargus excitedly asked if it was too much. Zane replied that he didn't. The team members looked at the enemy and shouted in shock that there was not even a scratch on him, and he was also floating. The man actually flew into the sky in the form of a lotus. Jade looked at him excitedly and thought that this pose was really. Jade knew something bad. He was scared by what he had just realized, but he had to prevent it. Jade quickly jumped up and flew towards the man who was still sitting. The guy looked at him intently. He was trying to get to him faster. He noticed how the man lowered his head. Jade excitedly shouted that he was using boundaries. The man said that Yogamatel, he used the skill. The man fired magic particles at the team, but Jade managed to activate the protective shield. The whole team looked at him in surprise. They did not expect this.